Hey guys. As requested, I'll be redoing What If Naruto and Team 7 were actually trained by Kakashi. Kakashi survived his losses in spirit as well as in body, and having learned both wisdom and intellect from his experiences, he now seeks to pass those traits on to his students. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1, Meet Team 7. Kakashi let the eraser bounce off his head. It was such a simple trap. He could see it as soon as he turned into the hallway outside the classroom. A chalk eraser crammed halfway out of the front door, the door wedged open to hold it in place. Only a literal idiot could fall for such a thing. If anyone knew the value of being underestimated, it was Kakashi the copy ninja. With a light puff of chalk, the eraser rebounded from his hair and clunked to the floor, to the explosive laughter of one of his potential genin, Uzumaki Naruto. The little blonde boy was clutching at his sides and pointing as he laughed, surprisingly cheerful for what Kakashi had read in the boy's files. Under his mask, Kakashi smiled as his second potential genin, Hirano Sakura, apologized profusely, almost able to hide her own amusement at the little prank. The girl with the oddly pink hair was known by her teachers as studious and intelligent, but her somewhat severe dislike for Naruto was also well documented. His smile dropped when he noticed his third potential genin, Uchiha Sasuke, glaring at his teammates in judgment from his chair. His file had been full of praise for his skills, and had a glaring omission for the boy's relationships with his peers. Not one of his former teachers ever claimed to see the boy smile, after his clan was destroyed. That one will be the biggest problem, I think. To be so focused and humorless is a poor sign at that age, I can attest to that personally. With any luck, I can be for him what Minato was for me. Kakashi crouched and picked up the eraser, looked at it thoughtfully, and declared to his new team. My first impression of this team is amusing. Naruto smirked. Sakura tried not to smirk. And Sasuke scowled that much harder. Right, let's see what our cute little students are like. Out loud, he said, "Meet me on the roof in 10 minutes. Then vanished in a puff of smoke. He did not go far, only a few feet, so he could stand on the wall outside the window and listen to what they did. Naruto shouted in surprise, then gleefully proclaimed he would learn how to do that before charging out the door. Sakura gave a single deep inhale, then asked Sasuke to escort her to the roof in a voice that all but proclaimed to the world her infatuation. Sasuke said nothing beyond a single irritated grunt, and the sound of his footsteps receding clearly indicated he was hurrying to stay away from her. Kakashi sighed and looked out into Konohagakure, trying to spot the shop he had visited after inspecting Naruto's barren home only hours ago, and reviewing the files on all three of his students. He caught sight of it, and after one last check to ensure his flight path was clear, leaped into the air to pick up his order. He returned minutes later with a shopping bag in hand, but decided on a whim to hide himself in the decorative trees on the roof and observe his students instead of announcing himself. He watched as the three children silently fumed at each other, Sakura against Naruto, Naruto against Sasuke, and Sasuke against everyone, up to and including the step he was sitting on. Kakashi sighed to himself and dropped down in front of them, getting all three of them to jump slightly in surprise. "Let us introduce ourselves over lunch," he said, pulling out several special bento boxes he had ordered from the shop. He set one down on the ground next to him, a plain gray box with a thick black strap. "I am Hatake Kakashi. I like things that I cannot talk about until you're 18. I dislike people who abandon their friends and teammates. I cannot talk about my hobbies until you're at least 16. I have no future goal at this time that I can tell you at your age." At his words, Sakura and Naruto glared at him, practically mouthing the word pervert together. Sasuke didn't react, and if Kakashi had not seen him shift slightly, he would have assumed he was being completely ignored. Kakashi offered a bento to Sakura first, a large pink thing decked out in Sakura petals and little hearts decorating it, but when she tried to take it, he held it firmly in place. She seemed to get the hint, and bowed to him politely. "I'm Hirano Sakura. I like the person I like." At this she blushed and turned to look at Sasuke, who ignored her. "My hobby is, that is, my dream is." She continued to blush and steal glances at the brooding Uchiha, who had yet to react, even when she gave out a high-pitched squeal. Fangirl Kunoichi, thought Kakashi, who proffered the bento again. It was hardly a shocking guess. Kakashi, along with many other jonin, had long noticed a tendency for young would-be kunoichi to gravitate towards a romantic view of their job, and it always amused him to hear Kurenai, an otherwise very level-headed and friendly woman who also happened to be a talented illusion mistress, rant about the fangirls she had to deal with during her time in the academy. Kakashi had nothing but respect for female shinobi, if they could get past the romantic garbage they tended to pick up before graduation. Sakura took the bento, gave another small bow, and opened it. She then frowned slightly and held it away from her with a look of distaste. It was filled with protein and carbohydrates, a cheeseburger and a selection of fried foods, the only hints of green being a pickle that looked suspiciously brown and crunchy and a single wilted lettuce leaf slathered in ketchup in a sad attempt to hide it under the meaty burger. "You are terribly thin, Sakura," said Kakashi after she rejected her food choice. "You have no apparent muscle mass, and frankly, I am fairly sure you're following the civilian trend of dieting yourself to that point. Starting tomorrow, you will be a proper kunoichi, and that means training until your muscles give out, then doing it again the next day, and the next, and so on. Your body will need all the fuel it can get, and I assure you, your figure will not suffer for it. So eat. The shinobi world is a cruel and dangerous place for those who value appearance over capability." Sakura glanced at Sasuke, who did not react, and ignored Naruto, who appeared to be drooling slightly and not watching her at all. She bowed again, then sat and quietly began to eat. Kakashi saw the tiny little smile she had once she started eating. He had been careful to get only the best for his student, as one good meal often encouraged another one later. One possible disaster down, he thought to himself. He next held out a bento to Naruto, a bright and ugly orange thing wrapped haphazardly with blue string. The boy grabbed it and tried to tug it out of his hands repeatedly, ultimately hanging off of his arm like a blond monkey. Kakashi cleared his throat and stared meaningfully at the kid until he pouted and gave a short bow. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, especially the ramen at Ichiraku, and even more so when Iruka-sensei pays for it. I hate waiting for cup ramen to cook. My hobby is to eat and compare cup ramen. And my dream is to become Hokage. I'll make the villagers acknowledge me." Kakashi resisted the urge to roll his eye as he handed the bento to Naruto. He had very little information on the holder of the nine-tailed fox, mostly because every report and opinion he had found focused on three things: his tendency to prank, his impossible dream to become Hokage, and his terrible grades. Kakashi suspected he would be doing a lot of remedial training with the boy in the future, but he also saw some potential. The sheer number of individual and highly creative pranks the boy had pulled off was impressive, and the fact that he got away with them almost every time until Iruka learned how to yell a confession out of him was encouraging. The fact that the Hokage had high hopes for the boy was also very telling, as he was known to use his crystal ball to spy on the boy regularly. "I saw how much you liked ramen," Kakashi said, as the boy tore into his bento excitedly, then gave out a yelp when he saw the contents of the box. It was filled to the brim with leafy greens of many sorts, and in the midst of it was a small pile of different sliced meats. "The Hokage saw how much you like ramen too. And we both saw how much of it you eat. He has charged me with shopping for your food, which I will do each Sunday. The remainder of your funds will be given to you then. This will continue until I believe you are able and willing to purchase more balanced food." Naruto was barely listening, his face drooping. No more ramen," he muttered sadly, sinking to the ground with a mournful look on his face. Kakashi sighed, loudly and melodramatically, then said, "No, only some ramen. Not all ramen. And ramen will have to come out of your own pocket after other food. This is a selection of foods. Try them and let me know what you like." Naruto moped about that, but Kakashi had the Hokage's blessing on this, so he was unconcerned. He reached into the bag and took out the last bento, a second dull gray box, this one with a red ribbon on it. He arched his one visible eyebrow and looked at Sasuke expectantly. "My name is Uchiha Sasuke," he said from where he sat. "I hate many things, and like very few things. And I have a goal more important than a mere dream, the revival of my clan, and to kill a certain man." Oh goody, thought Kakashi. He was no stranger to the more brutal aspects of shinobi life. He'd killed plenty of people, sometimes in quite messy and unpleasant ways. Like many shinobi, Kakashi coped with the memories and necessities by finding an outlet for his misery. He loved playing mind games with friends, just like Asuma loved cigarettes and Guy loved the power of youth. And then you got people like Sasuke, people who had nothing left of their old life but dreams tainted by the bitterness of their losses, and no future but to kill. Kakashi saw more than a few pass through the Anbu ranks while he was a captain there. Most of them left in body bags when they finally broke under the stress and made a fatal mistake on a mission, and Kakashi damn well wouldn't permit the last Uchiha to follow that explosively disastrous route if he could help it. That the man he wanted to kill was his own brother probably made it even worse. Kakashi shook the gray bento cheerfully at his mopey student. With an annoyed grunt, Sasuke stood, snatched the box from Kakashi's hand and opened it. He then pulled out a small, foil-wrapped square mass, a look of disgust appearing on his face. "Field rations," he said, a little tint of anger in his voice. Field rations, replied Kakashi, opening his own bento and taking an identical package from it. The little foiled blocks of misery, technically called field rations, but often called final resorts among the shinobi community, were perfectly balanced to give a shinobi everything they needed for a hard day of battle and murder. They also tasted about as delightful as their foil wrapping, so much so that some Anbu he knew would often eat them while wrapped, foil and all, when they were really having a rough day on the job. Kakashi had approached the Akimichi clan, hoping to improve the taste, only to be informed that the field rations he knew and loved to hate were the improved ones from the last captain who had brought it up, and that the blocks were so dense with nutrients that no amount of flavor would ever make them more than tolerable. Kakashi casually unwrapped half of his ration bar, a wistful smile crossing over his face as that thick, appetizing smell of super-processed chemically balanced cardboard hit him. I know a little about you, Sasuke, from talking to your academy teachers. You never speak to anyone. Never socialize. Never have fun. Never relax. If you want to be a machine of a man, then you may as well eat naught but field rations. They taste terrible, but they are all you need to survive. Why eat things that taste better, if you don't enjoy them? He held out his half-unwrapped bar in a mock toast. Sasuke grunted in annoyance and sat down, tossing the ration packet aside. He glowered straight ahead, which happened to be at Kakashi, even as his stomach growled. He was still glaring when Sakura stepped into his field of vision. Half of her burger was on the lid of her bento, and she was holding it out to him with a tentative smile. He heard an annoyed grunt to his right, so similar to his own, and glanced at Naruto, who looked away and held out the remainder of his own meal. I don't like you, Sasuke, but nobody likes field rations, and nobody deserves them. Not even you. I don't need your pity, grumbled Sasuke. It's not pity, replied Sakura quietly, laying the lid down in front of him. It's friendship, team, said Naruto, who looked at Sasuke and gave a small smile. We'll be a team now. We should act like it, when I'm not kicking your butt in a spar or something. Sasuke stood and started to walk away from his teammates, and Kakashi gave a little sigh. He thought for a brief moment, less than a second, and decided that if it came to it, he'd rather an impotently angry Uchiha than one who thought he could get away with blowing off his teammates. Kakashi waves his hand cheerfully, and loudly called out. So you want to go back to the academy, Uchiha? Sasuke stopped walking, and Kakashi could see the boy's fists tightening. Konohagakure does not need weak shinobi who get themselves and their teammates killed, Sasuke-kun, and that is exactly as you would become if you walk away now. You will go back to the academy with a note in your files, does not work well with others. You will certainly get no training from me. And you will keep returning, with the same message to each teacher, from every jonin I know who is competent enough to train you well, because we'll all see the same thing. Until you finally get someone who has no idea what you have suffered and decides to keep you in their team even if your team suffers for it, out of pity. Kakashi's cheerful voice did not waver in spite of the boy's sudden tenseness. And then, you will know more suffering, more regret, more pity, because you will become a magnet for death. Your own callous, uncaring nature will make you and those around you suffer. Allies will die because they believe they cannot ask you for help, and the survivors will pity you for your loss. Potential friendships will die, because after being rebuffed too many times, people tend to give up and find other friends, and those lost friends and allies will look on you with pity when you walk by. Right now you go home to silence, but you are not alone yet, because you have been surrounded by others and forced to interact with them in the academy setting. You will not know loss until you realize you have not spoken for a week and nobody cares because they think of you as an object of their environment instead of a human. Kakashi started to walk slowly towards Sasuke, watching the boy's fists turn white while he spoke. And then you'll die. Maybe you'll refuse help as you take on a foe stronger than you. Maybe you'll snap and chase after your brother before you are ready, and get slaughtered by someone powerful enough to slay your entire clan. Maybe you'll live a long and dull life of failure before having a heart attack at home and dropping dead, unnoticed and unlamented until someone happens to sense the smell of your rotting body and contacts the authorities out of pity for the poor old man who had no one to care for him. Kakashi came to a stop behind Sasuke. In none of these cases do you get your revenge. In all of these cases, you failed to revive your clan. Those schoolgirls who crush on you now in that annoying way eventually grow into women who know better than to waste their time. No children, no future, and the Uchiha clan dies with you. On the path that you are currently on. Kakashi reached out and gently grabbed Sasuke's shoulder, turning the around to face him. You will fail at everything you claim you want. Sasuke's face was set in a deep scowl, his eyes clenched shut. Look at me, Kakashi commanded, and he was not surprised to see that the boy's eyes were shining when the boy did as he was told. You may be surprised to know that I understand what it is to lose all that you value, he said, his voice no longer sounding cheerful. I found my father, The only family I had, dead in his home, having killed himself for his idea of honor. I watched my teammate die in front of me, a testament to my failure. I watched my sensei die because I was not strong enough to save him. I worked in Anbu for years, and many of my friends there died because as good as I am not perfect, and I cannot be everywhere at once. The pain never vanishes, even with revenge. You cannot succeed in your goals as an emotionless machine, because even if you win the battle, you'll lose the war, and die a terrible death after an unfulfilled life. Kakashi gently steered Sasuke back towards the group, and felt a moment of hope when Sasuke did not resist, although the boy clenched his eyes shut again to hide the unshed tears. Kakashi ordered him to look again, to look directly at his team, and thank the kami. Both Naruto and Sakura managed to pick up the spirit of this little moment, because they both smiled instead of looking worried, which Sasuke would probably interpret as pity. Both of these people are willing to go the distance, to try and meet you halfway, in spite of your disdain for them. Sakura may annoy you, but despite your constant rejection, she still seeks to help you when things go bad. And I know a bit about your rivalry with Naruto, but here he is, offering the food off of his plate to you. They are telling the truth, Sasuke. It is not pity to help a person you know and care for, it is friendship. I don't think they're going to expect you to become a cheerful person, but some acknowledgement of their care would not be unkind. Sasuke looked down at the ground for a few moments, blinking furiously. Eventually he did manage to look up and force a smile, a weak one but one nonetheless, and with a degree of hesitancy that Kakashi found both amusing and familiar from his own youth, the boy said. Thanks, I guess. He looked over at Naruto's bento, and his smile became a little more comfortable, and a little more taunting. Even if you already ate everything good, dope. Naruto's jaw dropped, and he stood, ready to yell. Sakura stood as well, a single pointing finger aimed squarely at Naruto. But neither one of them pulled the food away from Sasuke, and in that moment, Kakashi made his decision. I can work with this. Everyone froze when Kakashi started clapping. When he had their attention, Kakashi stretched and said, There is a saying I have adopted from a dear friend of mine. The saying is, those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. The greatest power of any shinobi is their ability to work with other shinobi. He held out his hand, fingers spread. Individually, there is always a weakness. He closed his hand into a tight fist. Together, those weaknesses are negated, and all that is left is strength. Kakashi watched his students as he spoke and saw the message hit home, especially for a certain angst-ridden Uchiha who wanted power, which was exactly what Kakashi was hoping for. Get them emotional and then present your argument when their logical tendencies are influenced by that emotion. Sasuke will be pissed when I teach them that and he realizes what I did, but by then he'll be healthy enough to handle it, hopefully. Traditionally, he continued, I would use something known as the bell test to determine if you could work as a team. In it, you must take 2 bells from my person. It is always said that only the 2 with the bells would pass, in the hopes of driving a wedge between the team, and those who could not cooperate were failed and sent back to the academy. He raised a hand, forestalling the inevitable gasps and shouting, I will not fail you! You all have shown a willingness to cooperate among yourselves in spite of your differences, even if it was harder for some than others. Kakashi smiled when Naruto gave Sasuke a gentle punch in the arm and a grin, and was satisfied when Sasuke managed to keep his already strained smile in place and Sakura managed not to hit Naruto in turn. Tomorrow, we will meet at Training Ground 3. You will be tasked with taking the bells from me. You cannot hope to stop a jonin such as myself on your own, or even as a team. I merely want to see what you can do, given an impossible task. Prepare yourselves. He waved cheerfully, then vanished. Sasuke shook his head and started to walk away, far more tired than he wanted to admit, then stopped when Naruto snagged his arm. Hold up, teammate, the orange boy said quickly. We need to plan. Sasuke scoffed. What is there to plan? He said. You charge in and get a beatdown. Sakura runs away and gets a beatdown. I attack and snag the bells. Naruto rolled his eyes at that comment, but it was Sakura who spoke up. Sasuke-kun, he is a jonin, and a famously powerful one. We are all genin, brand new and with no real training. He could almost certainly club all 3 of us down without a thought. He must want something other than a straight fight, and I think it has something to do with the whole teamwork thing. Naruto nodded vigorously. Yeah, what Sakura-chan said. We need a plan. Sasuke turned to leave, then stopped and turned back to them, Kakashi's words still fresh in his mind. I can at least give them a chance, I guess, he thought. I can do that much. He frowned, glaring at them, before letting out a sigh and crossing his arms. Fine, he grumbled, his voice filled with distaste. Let's hear this idea of yours. Chapter 2, The Value of Planning Ahead. Kakashi was not in the habit of showing up on time for anything. In truth, he was famous for being late to every event, no matter how important. This reputation had been carefully cultivated for many years, and as far as he knew, nobody ever expected him to arrive at an appointed time, never mind early. The reason for this habit was simple. If nobody expected him on time, then they would never look for him. Nearly an hour before the test was supposed to start, he had arrived at Training Ground 3. There he waited, crouched in a carefully constructed blind in the trees, known of and maintained secretly by every jonin who took on students and brought them to the place. This training ground was simple, a large dirt clearing surrounded by trees, save for the side with a river on its border. 3 wooden posts had been hammered into the ground at some point, and showed signs of regular and brutal target practice from its past use. He watched silently as Sasuke, Sakura, and eventually Naruto all arrived exactly on time. He observed them for a further 2 hours, as the sun rose higher and higher, and was glad to note that each of them, Sasuke included, were a little more chatty, generally whispering quietly to one another, possibly planning. At one point, he distinctly thought he heard Naruto say, "That would never work," only for Sakura to shush him. Eventually he decided they had waited enough to be good and angry, so he took off silently for the entrance of the training ground. Once he arrived there, he started taking a slow and leisurely walk towards his students. When he walked into view, he raised his hand in greeting. "You're late," they all shouted at him. Even Sasuke looked vexed at his late arrival. Kakashi shrugged and pointed down the road. "You see, a black cat crossed my path and…" He shrugged again, and dropped the story, much to his amusement and their aggravation. "So let's move on." He pulled out an alarm clock and set the alarm for noon, then attached a pair of silver bells to his belt. "You have until noon to claim the bells. Use any means you can." He looked up at them, and let a little iron into his voice. "Come at me with the will to kill me. Nothing less will work against someone of my caliber. Understood?" The students nodded and settled into fighting stances. "Right," he said, as he reached into his belt pouch and pulled it out. All 3 of his students stared as he took his well-worn copy of Ika Paradise and flipped it open in front of his face, and he was amused to see even Sasuke turned a little pink. After a few moments and a giggle, he looked back at them and said, "Well, begin." "All right. Let's have a fair fight." Kakashi resisted the urge to roll his eye at Naruto as he stood there and brazenly challenged him to a one-on-one fight. He was surprised to see the other 2 back off slightly, as if they would take no part in it. "Very well, I'll teach you the first shinobi art, taijutsu, then." Naruto charged at Kakashi, a little bundle of furious energy windmilling across the dirt. He came in high with a leaping punch, and Kakashi didn't even bother to look at the boy as he grabbed Naruto's fist and pivoted, throwing the boy over his shoulder to tumble in the dirt. Undeterred, Naruto rolled to his feet and came in low, aiming for Kakashi's knee. Kakashi raised his leg, again without looking, and let Naruto slide harmlessly by. "You know, if taijutsu is not your particular skill, maybe you should stop trying to use it against me." Naruto yelled and charged, this time keeping his feet on the ground. His stance and attacks were sloppy, ill-disciplined, but they were also much harder to predict. Kakashi was willing to grant that, in a one-on-one fight, Naruto would probably manage the middle of the back from his academy class. Not bad for a genin, but not outstanding. Kakashi noticed that the other 2 were positioning themselves on either side of him, and took several steps back to keep them within his vision as he parried Naruto's ineffective efforts. Then Naruto was jumping away from him, and he laughed as he shouted, "Now!" Kakashi ducked slightly and glanced at the other 2 genin, who did nothing, simply standing in place and watching him. Then they raised their fingers and made the sign of release, vanishing into 2 puffs of smoke, 2 very large puffs of smoke that flowed around him and Naruto. "A smoke screen, using 2 clones to keep me in place. Meanwhile, the other 2 must be off planning something." Kakashi found himself approving of their efforts. They obviously had a plan worked out, if they needed no communication, but in the drifting smoke, Kakashi could still see nothing threatening. Then he heard the faint whistle of wire swishing through the air at high speed, approaching from all sides. "Oh ho," he thought cheerfully as Naruto jumped over the rapidly approaching wire, "a trap. How quaint." Kakashi jumped hard, straight up, and pulled the forehead protector that covered his other eye up slightly. His Sharingan eye activated instantly, taking in the details of his surroundings with perfect clarity, and he used it to observe the trap in motion below him. He saw several lines crossing through the space he had been standing in earlier, and as he watched, further lines could be seen starting to move through the loose dirt of the training ground. Layer after layer of wire started to pull in towards where they had been fighting, crossing the entire area like a flower slowly closing around him. He could see them all, hundreds of wires flowing into the pattern and starting to cloud the area below with the dirt that concealed them. Even as he reached the apex of his leap, he saw the first strands hit the 3 training posts, where they struck with enough force to dig into the wood, and more than enough force to bind Kakashi to them if they had caught him. Not bad, he thought, but not good enough. Oh. That was when he noticed the single wire attached to the ground, almost exactly under him and pulled tight in a path that leads straight at him, and past him. A shadow flickered in the corner of his eye, and he smiled even as he turned his back to the ground below, and raised his arms to prepare for the attack. Sasuke, using the wire to guide him, had jumped from the edge of the trees, swinging in a perfect parabolic arc, and when he was above Kakashi he had pulled hard, dragging himself out of the arc and flying straight at his teacher, head first and leg cocked for a powerful kick. Kakashi blocked the kick, feeling it hammer hard into his arms hard enough to risk harming him if it had landed. He barely felt the tug at his belt, but he felt it, and smiled even harder as he resisted the urge to stop the genin from snagging the bells. I don't need to win here, he thought, I need to lose to their combined efforts. How else would you encourage teamwork? He gave Sasuke a push to make sure the boy landed on his feet instead of his head, then landed on his own feet with a thud. Sasuke landed gracefully for such a hard landing, then straightened and looked at Kakashi with a smirk. He held his hand out, fist closed, then opened it to let the bells dangle and chime on their strings. From the tree line, hundreds of Naruto's shadow clones set up a cheer, a few even bursting out of the river to do so, while the original Naruto and Sakura broke cover and ran to join Sasuke. Kakashi stood, tucking his book away, and allowed himself to smile under his mask. Well done, you 3. The trap was well executed and nicely layered, Naruto, and a good use of your excessive manpower. And Sasuke, you focused on the mission instead of proving yourself against me, which is the right choice for a shinobi. He looked at their grinning faces, and decided to go for broke, in the hopes of reinforcing the lesson. Sakura, he said, allowing his voice to harden just a little. I am disappointed you did nothing to contribute. Her face fell as he said that, and Naruto sputtered and raised a fist to argue, but it was Sasuke who spoke first, glaring at Kakashi even harder than normal. When you left yesterday, she was the one who suggested we plan ahead and show up hours early to set a trap. She's also the one who suggested the wire trap idea after we found out the dobe could make shadow clones, and figured out where you would jump when it went off. She even suggested the wire I used to correct my course, so I could jump before you did and adjust accordingly. He said this in the same dull voice, like delivering a lecture, but his tone did nothing to negate the look of pride on Naruto's face, or the shocked and grateful blush on Sakura's. Yeah! Shouted Naruto. She even put together a script for my clones to follow, so I could sound convincing if someone was watching us. He crossed his arms and grunted. Not that you'd have noticed, being so late and all. Sasuke tossed the bells behind him, not even turning to look, and Sakura caught them as they fell. It is as much her victory as mine or the dobe's. We won together. Behind him, his teammates cheered, and for a brief moment, just a moment, he smiled. Excellent, thought Kakashi, and he allowed himself a little pride as managing to teach the most important lesson they would ever need. Ma, don't get too enthused, he said, waving his hands. I took it easy on you, you know. They all smirked, and he laughed a little. Still, I am proud of you 3. That was excellent teamwork, and it'll help all of you in your future goals. He looked at Sasuke and tilted his head slightly. All of your goals, he repeated, and Sasuke gave a small nod. Well, let's go get lunch, and we'll talk on how we'll be training in the future, shall we? My treat. Naruto and Sakura's excited shouts rang loud in his ears, but not loud enough to block out Sasuke's quiet whisper. As long as it's not ration bars. Kakashi smiled at his students as they settled into the barbecue place he had taken them to. Naruto had been clamoring for ramen, of course, but Kakashi was footing the bill, and he still wanted to encourage Sakura to eat properly as a shinobi. He was quite content to note that when it came time to order their portions, Sakura's was no smaller than Sasuke's. He was much less pleased at the size of Naruto's order, but he decided to take the loss gracefully. You did well, he said after their server left with their order, a strange grimace on her face. The 3 of them beamed at him as he talked, still flushed with excitement from their victory. In the future, we will have the following schedule. Each day, you will arrive at Training Ground 3 no later than 8 in the morning. I will try to arrive on time, but should I not arrive, you are to spar or otherwise practice whatever you have been assigned. I trust you to do so, both to make yourself and your teammates into better shinobi. At 11, we will break for an hour for lunch and personal needs. After that, we'll take a mission, which will be far less exciting than you are thinking, Naruto. The orange-clad boy made a face, but he settled down a little. After the mission, we will return to Training Ground 3 to continue training as I see fit. We will do this every day. He nodded as the genin looked at him with surprise. No, he said cheerfully. I don't intend to work you every day of the week. Instead, I want you to tell me when you need a day off. When you're so sore you think you might hurt yourself, when you need to get something important done, even if you just want to go see a movie, tell me, and I'll give you 3 the day off. Kakashi had expected approval from at least 2 of the genin, but instead, all 3 looked rather upset about that arrangement. He smiled at them under his mask and said, That said, I will also work you as long as you like. If you don't need it, don't take it, and you'll get that much stronger for it. Naruto grinned. I'm sure not going to take any days off more than I have to. I need to become strong to become the Hokage. Sasuke nodded in grudging approval at that. For once, we agree, Dobe. I need as much power as I can get. I'll be right there with you. Sakura looked at the 2 of them. I'm not sure I can do as much as you 2. I'm not nearly as physically fit as you. I may need to rest my body at times. She didn't mention the occasional family demand, couldn't, not in front of Sasuke. And Naruto, she added as an afterthought. But she looked at their faces, both filled with a mix of understanding and disappointment, and vowed to do better. She clenched her fists and gave them a smile. But I won't take a single day more than I have to. Naruto cheered loudly, but Sakura barely noticed. She barely noticed their food arriving. She barely noticed eating her meal. She barely noticed the fight between Kakashi and Naruto when the boy tried to order seconds. Because in that brief moment, when she vowed to be stronger for them, Sasuke had turned and smiled at her. It was a quick smile, and he had gone back to ignoring her after it, but it was the first time he ever reacted to her. In your face, I know, pig, Sakura's inner self shouted. Chapter 3: A Lesson in Economics. Kakashi waited for his sensei's son to wake up. The apartment manager had ignored the security for this floor, having also decided to leave this floor and used aside from his special, Hokage-mandated guest. Naruto, apparently, had taken the lack of security to heart, and had laid more than a few traps. The false paper wall that concealed his front door had been interesting. The sneezing powder balloon in the front door keyhole had been amusing. The kunai launched at groin level had been a genuine surprise. Nobody would expect it after such basic and childish defenses. Nobody but Kakashi anyhow. He caught the kunai before it could hit, reset the trap, and sat patiently in Naruto's living room as the sun came up, thumbing through his book with only the occasional giggle. He tucked the book away quickly when he heard Naruto started to stir, and silently made his way to the bedroom door. As an afterthought, he drew a kunai and posed with it menacingly. Paranoia is a good trait for shinobi, after all, he thought to himself. Good morning, he said cheerfully as soon as the door opened. Once Naruto managed to calm himself, and start his morning cup of ramen, he asked Kakashi what he was doing in his home. Came the reply. Today is Sunday, and as you recall, I will be shopping for food for you. What's that got to do with me? Grumbled Naruto, already mourning his blessed ramen. Kakashi rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't want to admit it, but he rather hoped Naruto would be more responsible if shown what sort of foods to buy. Not like he was being paid for the shopping trip. Well, he said, crinkling his eye with a huge smile, if you don't want the free meal at Ichiraka's. Yada! Shouted Naruto, jumping from the chair by the table. Let's go! He dashed for his bedroom, sleep clothes flying as he scrambled to get dressed. After the rest of the shopping, called out Kakashi unheard. It only took a few minutes of walking for Kakashi to notice the chilly reactions he and Naruto were getting from the crowds as they passed. Most of them outright ignored the boy as they passed, but more than a few civilians were giving the blonde a hefty dose of stink eye when they thought he was not looking. Those shinobi who passed by generally did not even notice the boy, but then, they barely paid attention to Kakashi either. Oi, Naruto, Kakashi said quietly. Do they always act like this? Naruto frowned in apparent confusion. Who? He asked. Kakashi nodded to one of the approaching civilians, an older woman who was already glaring at Naruto before he came near. When the boy got almost within reach, the woman stepped far to the side, never once letting Naruto out of her sight. She stood there glaring as the boy passed. Once she finally turned away, Kakashi stepped closer and whispered. Them. I can understand why folks would not pay you any attention in specific, but do you always get this many glares? Naruto pouted. Yeah. So? Kakashi said nothing. He had been told by the Hokage that Naruto knew about the kyubi locked inside of him, and had granted permission for Kakashi to discuss it in secret if need be, but it had never really crossed Kakashi's mind that even if the secret remained unsaid, most of the adults either knew the secret or had friends who knew it and allowed their friends to color their reactions. Everyone pretended he did not exist, except for those who took an active dislike in him. Then Kakashi stiffened, as his mind finally turned up an answer to something he'd been curious about. Naruto's cupboards and refrigerator had been nearly bare each time he had been in there. He knew Naruto had been receiving a modest pension from the Hokage ever since he got the apartment, amounting to 5,000 ryo a week, and while that was not an extravagant sum by any measure, it should be enough to feed the boy with something better than cup ramen. Something did not add up, and Kakashi was starting to suspect he knew what. They happened to be passing by a small corner shop, one that sold general civilian needs, so he paused and instructed Naruto to wait outside while he got something. When he walked in, he nodded his head. The shop carried civilian luxuries, consumer electronics, children's toys, rare spices, and a rack of candy and junk food in front of the counter. He picked up a small package of Pocky, priced at 10 ryo, just a cheap snack. He chatted with the owner for a few moments, making some banal conversation about the weather, then stepped back outside and led Naruto around the corner. "Naruto, I want you to walk into that store and buy one of these for me." He showed the blonde the package he had, then sent him on his way. 5 minutes later, Naruto was back, Pocky in hand and a sour look on his face. "How much did it cost, Naruto?" Kakashi asked. Naruto humphed and held out the package and receipt. Kakashi looked at the slip of paper and frowned. "Naruto, I trust you to answer me truthfully, but I have to ask to be certain. Is the amount on this receipt correct?" Naruto nodded, looking down at the ground. Kakashi stared at the slip. It was for 10 ryo of Pocky, and after taxes, tariffs, and one particular surcharge that said only cost of living, it came out to nearly 100 ryo. He could eat a full meal on that if he didn't do anything extravagant. A lot of things suddenly made terrible sense. He looked at Naruto, who seemed to be desperately trying not to cry. "It took me this long because, well, now I can't even afford the cheap ramen." "How much does the cheap ramen cost, Naruto?" "I can get it at the one store for 200 ryo per cup." 200 ryo, 3 times a day, for 7 days, came out to almost his entire budget. For cup ramen, worth very little more than this junk snack. Kakashi nodded and gave Naruto enough money to cover the overpriced Pocky. "Naruto, I want you to try something. I want you to use the henjutsu to imitate me, then walk back in and buy another. If they ask, tell them it was good and you just wanted some more. And don't take out your money until they give you the total." Naruto nodded and performed the transformation, turning into a remarkably good imitation of Kakashi. After a quick inspection to ensure it was good enough to at least fool a civilian shopkeeper, Kakashi waved him on, and Naruto walked off to buy some more. Within a minute he was back, walking slowly and staring at the receipt in his hands. Kakashi took it from him gently and looked at it. 10 ryo. "Naruto, wait here a moment while I have a word with the owner." Kakashi-sama, welcome back," said the shopkeeper. "Want some more already, eh? Can't say I sell a lot to adult shinobi, but what do I know?" Kakashi glanced at the shopkeeper as he approached and noted that the man looked normal. No frown lines or furrowed brow. No snarling low tone of voice. No cold glare. Just depressingly normal, another dumpy and slightly pudgy civilian, who just happened to be old enough to have been present during the QB attack. Kakashi shook his head as he glanced around. "Just looking for something." He picked up a small electric clock and brought it to the register. "Actually, there is a small problem. I think you may have mischarged me slightly on one of my purchases. I wonder if you could check my receipt?" The shopkeeper nodded quite cheerfully, and remained cheerful right until he saw the 100 ryo receipt. "Oh," he said quietly, his face falling. "I am quite sure this was an accident, Kakashi-sama." Kakashi nodded gracefully. Of course, these things happen." The shopkeeper perked up. "After all, to cheat someone is a terrible crime, no matter how young they are, or who they are." The shopkeeper lost his smile. "That crime, of cheating a shinobi in the service of Konohagakure, is punishable by litigation, forfeiture of property, jail time, or my personal favorite, death." By now, the shopkeeper had gone pale. All the more so, if the shinobi in question had the personal favor of the Hokage for his service in keeping us safe from a monster. The shopkeeper winced at that last part, and Kakashi knew he'd pegged the issue right on the nose. This one knew the secret. "So undoubtedly, this sort of accident is unlikely to happen again if, say, that student of mine was to come in and purchase something." The shopkeeper nodded frantically. "Because if not," Kakashi said, still in a friendly tone that belied the look on his face, "I am sure Hokage-sama would be willing to reinstate me into Anbu just long enough for a sentence to be passed on such a case." He casually laid his hand on the alarm clock and put a little elemental chakra into the device. The ear-splitting squeal as the speakers within buzzed, sizzled, and eventually melted, combined with the bright flash of the LCD overcharging and bursting into flames, seemed to make quite an impression on the shopkeeper. So did the melting plastic case as Kakashi increased the amount of chakra he was using for his little display of power. The shopkeeper apologized profusely in a shaking voice, gave him a full refund, and assured him no more mistakes would be made. Kakashi waved cheerfully as he walked out the door, leaving the flat, melted alarm clock where the drooping plastic had fused it to the counter. Admittedly, the death part was a slight exaggeration, and punishment was highly unlikely to be to the level of ruining the man, but what he didn't know could keep him safe from mysterious fires and Chidori holes in their doors at best and a furious, broken Jinchuriki swearing vengeance on all who wronged him at worst. He knew he'd probably catch some flack from the Hokage for scaring a civilian with a death threat, but all the same, Kakashi smiled at a job well and truly done. He kept smiling right until he turned the corner and saw the alley was now empty. He found Naruto on top of the Hokage monument some time later. The young man was just sitting there, arms around his legs, quietly sniffing. Kakashi walked over and had a seat next to him. He didn't speak, or put his arm around the boy, or otherwise comfort him. Any such comfort would be hollow at best. He just sat there and waited. After a few minutes of silence, Naruto finally spoke. "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling. Kakashi sighed. "Naruto, I know about the law and all things involved in it, as are you. Unfortunately, so do the rest of the adults in the village. It simply could not be covered up at the time. The law is there because the Hokage knew that this might happen, and desired that at least you might get a clean slate with those of your generation. They do not know you well, and blame you for something you had no control over, and treat you as something you are not. But with time, they will come to see you for who you are, just as Irika did. Give them time, and they will come around. Meanwhile, once word gets out about my reaction to all of this, at the least they will give you a fair price." Naruto was silent for a while, and they sat together, listening to the wind shake the leaves and branches of the forest that surrounded their village. Finally, Naruto seemed to come to a decision, and looked at Kakashi. "Should I tell them?" Kakashi shrugged, and took it as a question on his entire generation, not just his team. "I cannot promise they will accept it without question. Some, undoubtedly, will not. But for the most part, I think it is better for them to know now, rather than find out later, should they figure it out for themselves. However, only you may tell them. I have permission to discuss this with you as needed, but nobody has permission to break that law fully except for you. It's up to you if, and when, you should." Naruto lapsed into silence again, and remained that way until Kakashi handed him a small pad of paper. "This is a general list of prices for common goods. If you get charged anything more than this, I want you to come to me. I also want you to keep receipts for everything you buy, in case I need to refund you. And if at any time you are worried about being cheated, I give you permission to leave the shop and secretly henge into me to make a purchase. But not for any other reason, got it?" Naruto managed to smile a little at the harmless accusation of what he probably would have planned to do when he felt better, and tucked the list into his belt pouch. "I got it, Kakashi-sensei. No using your appearance for pranks." "Good." Kakashi stood and stretched, then offered a hand to his young student. "I believe I still owe you a trip to Ichiraku's." Naruto smiled and took his hand to get up, and for just a moment, all was right with the world. Kakashi happened to notice the tail they had picked up on the way to the stand, and when they turned a convenient corner, he created a shadow clone and sent it on its way. Naruto looked at him oddly, but he waved it off as nothing important. When the clone dispelled, informing him of their stalker, Kakashi almost giggled. It was sort of cute, knowing the little Hyuga heiress was following Naruto around like a lost puppy. Then the pieces fell into place in his mind, and over a bowl of remarkably tasty ramen, to the sound of Naruto's frantic slurping and Tuchi and his daughter's laughter, Kakashi began to plan for the growth of his students. All of them. Chapter 4. There is number 3 in team. Kakashi sat at the bar, half an eye on his book and half of it on the crowd, as he waited for his target. When she walked in, every male and most of the females immediately noticed. In a world of blacks and dark tones, her penchant for white bandages and red trim made her stand out like a lightning bolt on the plains, and her unnaturally red eyes marked her as something unusual. Because of her rather unique look, and her fairly recent promotion to Jonin, many of the members of the Konoha shinobi forces still viewed her with at least a little doubt. "And if, Kakashi-san," said Kurenai, as he poured a cup for Kurenai, "you mentioned in your note that you had a proposition for my students and myself, I believe?" Kakashi nodded and set the bottle down. He felt slight amusement when she did not immediately pick it up, but remained focused entirely on him. Taking this serious, he thought. "Good. I'll start by asking a question. to see if you noticed the same thing I have. You know that Hyuga Hinata has a habit of watching Uzumaki Naruto when he trains sometimes? Kurenai nodded, and her eyes narrowed. Relax, he said, raising one hand in peace. I see nothing wrong with this. In truth, I see an opportunity. Your squad is slated to be a tracking squad, yes? She nodded, and her expression eased into a more neutral look. Yes. All three of them are natural trackers. Hyuga Hinata has the Byakugan, allowing her to see her immediate surroundings. Inuzuka Kiba has a strong sense of smell and hearing, allowing him to follow at a distance. And Aburaim Shino can use his insects to mark targets and track them at nearly any range. It was decided they would become a go-to team for observation and tracking in the future. Kakashi nodded. And how are they doing? She huffed. Poorly. Shino is well trained by his clan and is fairly well-rounded, but he is remarkably quiet and not endearing himself to the team. Kiba is energetic, but he tends to lead with his face, and it's going to get him killed someday if he faces a remotely competent foe. And Hinata? She turned a glare at Kakashi. What? He asked. You have a habit of speaking out of turn. I want you to swear, on the names on the memorial, that you won't say a word of this. That's not a good sign. Kurenai was not terribly close to him, but she knew him, and knew of him, enough to know that such an oath would be a very serious one for Kakashi. He joked and played around plenty, but he did not do so when it came to his former teammates, or his sensei. Kakashi agreed after a moment's thought, and mentally braced himself for what must be terrible news. Hinata should not be a shinobi. Not yet, and maybe not ever. Kurenai sat a little stiffer in her seat and glared at the table. She is so terrified of doing poorly, she fails to even try. I know she has the technique, but I can't get her to so much as punch her teammates. And every time I try to encourage her inner strength, her self-doubt immediately sets in and kills any gain she might have made. I've watched it happen, so clear on her face that it is unmistakable. She looked to one side, in the direction of the wall, and silently mouthed the words, damned clans, and Kakashi understood the meaning, and her roundabout way of saying it. Clans in Konohagakure had a great deal of political power, as well as certain rights to control and command their members. Kurenai could do very little to help Hinata if the girl simply returned each day to the place that tore her self-esteem to shreds. Kakashi grinned, and poured some sake in the second cup and slid it across the table. Sure, it's bad, he thought, but not nearly as bad as I feared. Really, no worse than my own students. In the past week, Kakashi had begun training his students in tree climbing and physical fitness, and all of his own students had flaws he was having trouble working through. Sasuke often became socially distant. He managed to become civil, and he even smiled at some points, but the moment Naruto or Sakura irritated him, he would return to his cold personality. He did not respect either of his teammates, and assumed he was stronger and deserved more attention and training from Kakashi. Sakura was a fangirl, and it showed in her training. While she excelled at the tree climbing exercise, when it came time for the physical fitness, she refused to work any more than was required, and would quit whenever she began to work up a sweat. Based on how she kept glancing at Sasuke, Kakashi suspected she was worried about the boy seeing her in an unladylike condition. Kakashi had considered bringing in the rather independent Kurenai to supervise a session and break the girl out of that little habit, even before he thought of this proposition he had. And Naruto. Naruto was a good kid, and a hard worker, but between chakra control problems caused by the fox sealed in his gut and his own impatient, somewhat brash personality, he was a trial to train. Kakashi knew about the shadow clone technique, and was familiar with how it could be used to speed training, but unless he had a good excuse to bring it up, he was worried that Sasuke would get angry about the special instructions, or worse, kill himself trying to use the same technique. But Kakashi had figured out a way to bypass all of these problems, with a little mutual help. How would you like to solve all of your problems, and get a reputation for thinking outside the box at the same time? Kurenai looked at him for a moment, then smiled slightly and picked up the sake bottle to pour him a drink in return. Let's hear this. Team 7 and Team 8 met at Training Ground 3 within minutes of finishing their D ranks, and started discussing the day and their missions in a friendly manner. I'm telling you, said Kiba, gesticulating wildly as he told the story. That friggin' cat must be a ninja under an animal henge or something. It ran up the wall when I cornered it. On his head, his dog Akakmaru yapped in agreement. The boy wore a thick gray coat in spite of the warm afternoon sun, and his tousled and uncombed hair gave the impression of someone who never bothered to look in a mirror unless required to. Hinata tapped her fingers together nervously before interrupting, quietly pointing out that the wall in question was only a few feet high, before ducking her head slightly as if she was trying to hide under her short-cut blue hair. When Kiba turned to disagree, Shino piped up and went into a convoluted discourse on the natural agility of cats, and in spite of the tall collar of his jacket, the sunglasses that concealed his eyes, and the dull monotone he always spoke with, he still gave an impression of slight mockery to all those who were listening, including Kiba, who started to shout. Naruto could not help himself. He laughed himself hoarse. He had come to realize that in spite of his generally being an outcast at school, he had missed having people around, and even if everyone but Hinata scoffed when he shouted about becoming the Hokage, they were still friends. Maybe not deep friends, but friends. Sakura, however, was less than amused, because neither of their teachers had returned from their errands, and she found that Sasuke seemed even more distant when there were more people around. He had been staring into the surrounding woods for the last 5 minutes, and while she had suspected at first that he was looking for Kakashi, she was beginning to wonder if he was doing it just to avoid taking part in the conversation. She opened her mouth to ask him for training advice away from the others, in the hopes he might relax a little with fewer people, when a cloud of smoke exploded into being next to the group to reveal both of their wayward sensei. Kurenai had a clipboard and a thick pile of paperwork, while Kakashi carried nothing but his habitual book. Sorry, he said with a wave. I passed a man with no feet who was trying to sell his old shoes and... Lies! Shouted Sakura, Naruto, and Kiba, all three pointing at him. Kurenai smirked, and Hinata managed a tiny laugh. Sasuke and Shino both shared a glance and ignored the whole thing. Right, said Kurenai, stepping forward. Sorry, but we had to double-check a few things with the Hokage before we officially tried this. She indicated everyone to gather around, and when Sasuke made no move to join them, glared at him until he complied. As you may know, she began, each genin is placed in a 3-person squad, and they generally train and do missions together exclusively. This is to encourage teamwork, and help ensure each member is familiar with the other. For the most part, genin remain in their squads in the future, barring problems or emergencies. She pointed at Kakashi with her clipboard, and he waved lazily without taking his eyes off of his book. Kakashi and I have noticed a few ways in which having teams 7 and 8 train together might help both become stronger, much faster than would otherwise be likely. We have gotten permission to test this idea from the Hokage. Each day, we will continue to train with our normal teams in the morning, then perform our D ranks after lunch. Once finished, however, in the time that would usually be spent doing individual training, we will instead train together. You will each receive a sparring partner who will be well suited to your needs as a growing shinobi. Kakashi snapped his book shut and stood from his slouched position to say his bit. All of you, first and foremost, need taijutsu training, so it is here that we shall start. Shino, Sasuke, you are both proficient already, so you'll be paired up. Work together to practice what you know and try to work on your speed. The two boys looked at each other and nodded, and at least to a small degree, they were relieved to have such a serious and strong opponent. Sakura, Kiba. Both stood a little straighter. Both of you hold each other's weaknesses as strengths. Kiba, you tend to attack head-on, full strength, with little in the way of technique. Kiba's lip rose slightly in a snarl, but he did not disagree, and after Akamaru yapped his agreement, Kiba snorted to one side and nodded. Sakura, you have the basis for great technique, but you never push yourself physically, and against someone strong like Kiba, you'll need every ounce of strength you have. I suspect Kiba will thrash you soundly at first, so don't get discouraged. Take advantage of it, and become stronger. Sakura nodded, and while her face looked worried, her eyes sparked with a touch of inner fire. Given enough time and strength, your superior technique will turn the tables on him. Kiba's eyes nearly glowed with quiet fury, and Kakashi smiled under his mask. That should get them sorted in good time. Hinata tapped her fingers and kept glancing over at Naruto, her face starting to warm up. This means... Even her thoughts froze suddenly when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Yeah! Shouted Naruto, throwing his other fist in the air. That means it's you and me, Hinata-chan! Let's get physical! Hinata's face glowed red for a brief moment, before she let out a little sigh and slumped forward. Said Naruto, confused. Hinata? You okay? Everyone face-bombed. Even Shino. Even Sasuke. Even the Anbu in the trees watching over this experiment. And especially Kakashi. What? Naruto asked, sheepishly. Hinata woke to find herself laying on the ground with the orange jacket for a pillow and Kakashi watching over her. She stiffened and sat up. Kakashi-sensei, sorry, I didn't. Kakashi interrupted with a wave of his hand. It's okay, Hinata. This is why you and Naruto are paired up. He nodded at the training ground. In the distance, Sasuke and Shino seemed to be trading blows in an elaborate game of strikes, blocks, and counter-strikes, with almost no footwork involved. Kiba was charging at Sakura, and Hinata was shocked when the pink-haired girl managed to grab Kiba's wrist in passing and send him tumbling. Kurenai was watching them all fight, occasionally shouting out advice to Sakura or Kiba when she saw a glaring problem. And Naruto was fighting himself. He had a half-dozen clones out, and they had apparently split into 2 teams for what looked like a spirited game of dodge shuriken. Team Naruto seemed to be winning, but then, Team Naruto was also losing, and none of them seemed to really know who was on which team, so it ultimately came down to a free-for-all, and the Narutos were chattering loudly and cheerfully as they fought. Naruto has one great advantage over the others, in that he has the Shadow Clone Jutsu and the chakra reserves to make it almost effortless. The clones are solid enough to fight, but fall in a single blow. We chose him as your opponent for 2 reasons. First, you can go all out against a clone, and not hurt him in the least. Your gentle fist is intended to be painful and debilitating, making it dangerous to practice at full force. But here is a foe you can use it against without fear. Meanwhile, Naruto is unpredictable and quick to think, but he is not particularly fast or skilled, and using his clones, I hope to fix both of those problems by pitting him against someone that has both those traits. Understood, she said quietly, doubtfully. Kakashi could see exactly what Kurenai had been talking about as his compliment was immediately smothered by doubt. No matter, he thought, we'll see what we can do about that. Kakashi was not above manipulating someone for their own good, and Hinata had a big and obvious button he could push to help her resist that self-doubt. Kakashi leaned down and looked her in the face. The other reason, he said very quietly, is Naruto is an inspiring person. He never quits, never backs down, and fights with all of his strength. You could do much worse, learning that sort of thing from him, and he could certainly use a dash of quiet contemplation, believe me. She nodded, too nervous, and excited, and nervous, and worried, and nervous for words, as Naruto's sensei exactly described all the traits she valued in Naruto. Also, you two would be cute together, if you can get the fainting under control. Naruto looked over at Kakashi when the last of his clones popped. She awake yet, Kakashi-sensei? Give her a few more minutes, Naruto. He shouted back cheerfully from where she had once again passed out. Aw man, said Naruto, summoning another set of clones. Eventually, Kakashi led the still red-tinted Hinata over to Naruto. He tossed the kid's jacket back to him, then said, Naruto, make a few clones, please. Naruto pulled on his jacket and summoned a half-dozen shadow clones. Kakashi wandered over to stand next to Naruto. Okay, before we really begin, put this on. He handed Naruto a strip of cloth and pointed at his own eye. Blindfold yourself. Naruto grumbled and complied. Remember, said Kakashi, this won't hurt at all, so give it your best, Hinata. Yeah, Hinata, kick my ass. Naruto cheered, causing her to blush and Kakashi to shake his head and chuckle. Kakashi used hand signs to indicate one of the clones to attack quietly. There was a swish of cloth as the clone charged. I can do this, he wants me to hit his clone, he won't be hurt. Hinata chanted those words in her head as the clone approached. Just as it came within reach, she stepped lightly to the side, almost casually sidestepping its wild punch, and tagged it hard with a juken strike to the chest. It vanished with a poof. Naruto cheered for her, and her heart beat hard as she silently cheered for herself as well. I can do this, she thought, and the sheer energy and relief she felt at such a thought was almost overwhelming. Kakashi nodded to her, then turned to Naruto. How did she win, Naruto? She punched me in the chest, said the blindfolded blonde. Kakashi waited for the penny to drop, and was not disappointed when it did. Wait! Shouted Naruto, ripping off the cloth around his eyes and staring at the two of them. How did I see that? What do you think? Asked Kakashi. Naruto paused to consider, then raised his index finger. Of course. Kakashi nodded, waiting for him. I have the Byakugan. Kakashi and Hinata shared a look. The look was quiet and small and polite and clearly communicated the shared belief that, wonderful as a person Naruto was, he was also, at times, a complete and total idiot. I don't think that's what happened, Naruto-kun. Naruto, what happened was you saw the greatest strength of the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Whatever your clone sees or does, you will see as well. Shadow clones make excellent spies, can help you study, and can even help you train in almost anything but physical conditioning, even new jutsu. At that point, Naruto was almost drooling at the prospect of mastering jutsu with hundreds of clones. There's the bait, thought Kakashi. And now the hook. Good thing you have it, because you'll need it to make up for how terrible your skills are. Naruto's jaw dropped, and Kakashi continued talking in the hopes of forestalling the coming storm of complaints. When your clone attacked Hinata, she didn't even have to try and stop you. In one move, she delivered what would have been a lethal hit. She trounced you with casual ease, and while it speaks well of her training, it speaks poorly of yours. I can't help that Hinata-chan's awesome, Naruto muttered to the side, indirectly earning the gratitude of both her and his teacher. In any case, to get you used to using this tool, your goal is to watch Hinata and your clones fight. Each time a clone goes down, you will immediately signal the next to attack. You, meanwhile, will sort their memories and your own outside observation and try to find a weak point in her technique to land a hit. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back to them. Once you manage to land 3 hits in a row on Hinata, I'll teach you something new to practice. Don't make it too easy on him, Hinata. You could use the conditioning according to Kurenai, and I know Naruto respects hard work more than anything in the world. He turned away and walked towards the fight between Shino and Sasuke, waving over his back. 3 for 3, he thought, and with a small giggle, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. Given another 10 years, maybe Jiraiya could use this for his next book. Chapter 5, We're Gonna Need a Montage. Kakashi sat in the same bar where barely a week ago he and Kurenai had met previously, and his newfound ally sat across from him once again. They were both leaning back, sake cups in hand and wordlessly staring at the wooden table, both fighting to keep a smile from their face. Such a small celebration, suitable for a successful C-rank mission or learning a new jutsu, and certainly not sufficient for the unmitigated success of their cross-training efforts. Kakashi wanted to leap into the streets, crowing like a freshly minted chunin. He wanted to run up to Mato Guy, show him the notes they had made on their students' progress, then pants him in front of his youthful team, and run giggling into the night. He wanted to smack Shimura Danzo in the face with another copy of those same notes, and vanish before the exploding tag inside went off. None of this would happen, naturally. Danzo would never learn, not until someone hit him with something a little harder than paperwork, and Kakashi thought he knew which little genin on his team might end up doing just that someday. Guy might take it as a challenge and try to get him back, which was a thing of nightmares. No, Kakashi and Kurenai had quietly compared notes, had a short discussion, and promptly returned to their usual bar to get a small drink in quiet celebration of the possibility that their students were going to crush all who faced them, and nobody would ever see it coming. And if anyone knew the value of being underestimated, it was Kakashi. He was beginning to suspect that his students would have the benefit of the same once they were up for their exams. He pulled the papers back to his side of the table and flicked through them again, barely able to believe what he already knew. Their normal morning training was progressing about as he had expected, and all of their students had completed the task of climbing trees with chakra. But the group training. Hinata was still timid, but she had finally started really fighting back on the 3rd day, after she, accidentally, hit her sparring partner in the face with a palm strike while trying to deflect his attack. Kakashi slotted the mental quotation marks into that thought, as he was fairly certain Naruto had deliberately taken the blow to his face after specifically asking for permission to fight her, to test what he had picked up observing his clones. He had even had the audacity to wink at Kakashi just before he was hit. He had fallen back, blood streaming from his face. As Hinata stuttered a broken apology, mortified, unable to look him in the eyes, he had laughed. She had stood there and stared in shock as he laughed, wiped the blood from his nose, then offered her a fist bump while congratulating her on her strike. She hesitantly returned the gesture, a tad awkward with the informal acknowledgement. It had taken, by Kakashi's count, 7 accidental injuries before she accepted his encouragement and started to actually fight with some degree of force. By the end of that day, she was physically exhausted, but was still smiling when they split for the night. On the 4th day, it had only taken one reminder from Naruto about her progress the other day for her to get back into the fight. On the 5th day, it didn't even take that. And on the 6th day, Kakashi had been deeply amused to see the shy, timid, frightened little Kunoichi end the first spar with a sudden and immediate blow, without hesitation or warning. And he was even more amused when Naruto had cheered her on from where he had landed in the dirt. Naruto, meanwhile, had learned a lot by observing his clones getting crushed, both with their memories and his own outside point of view. He still had no real taijutsu skill, but in the end, that only made him more terrifying in his fights. At one point, he had watched Hinata dispel 3 clones with a single sweep of her hand. When the next set of clones was sent in, they approached in the same way, and when she tried the same arm sweep, he had neatly trapped her arm before it could really get moving and had tapped her in the ribs before she could break free. On the 6th day, after the first match, they had been permitted to fight with ninjutsu in light of Hinata's improvement. Naruto had demonstrated just how well he had been paying attention to the actual lesson Kakashi was trying to teach him by refusing to use any jutsu at all. He simply waded in, evading Hinata's strikes and following his own reflexes, born of nearly a month's worth of sparring practice crammed into a week from the use of his clones, until she was so tired he casually ducked her last strike and tapped her on the forehead. "I got you, Hinata!" he said with a roguish grin, giving her a pat on the shoulder and a thumbs up. Kakashi called it a win after she passed out with a sigh, a very happy sigh. Sasuke and Shino had started off well enough. They fought with almost mechanical grace, two genius shinobi testing their own skills. Not a word was said as they fought, no compliments paid or taunts thrown, just a single silent nod each time a round ended definitively. On the first break of the first day, Shino had silently sat down on the branch of the tree next to where Sasuke perched. They said nothing during the entire break, did not even look at each other. By the third day, Kakashi had noted that Sasuke was seeking out Shino during breaks. They had yet to say a word directly to one another at that time, save for as required by their teachers or as needed in their spars. Finally, on the sixth day, Sasuke had sat down next to his quiet companion and challenged him to a spar with ninjutsu aloud. Shino agreed, asking only that excessive damage to his Kikaichu colony be avoided. What happened a long and skillful battle that lasted nearly an half-hour, and Kakashi was proud of them both. Shino showed a great deal of skill in deception and evasion, and Sasuke, for all of his slightly antisocial tendencies during morning training, had been careful not to slaughter the bugs. Even when it made tactical sense. Even when it cost him the match when a bug clone finally knocked him down. He simply accepted the loss with a quiet nod and returned to the ready position. But the real surprise had been Sakura. Kakashi felt almost ashamed how badly he had underestimated her, and he was willing to bet Kiba certainly did. On the first day, they faced off one-on-one while Akamaru watched. Kiba was in much better shape and was much stronger than his sparring partner, and Sakura would have been hard-pressed under any circumstances. Sakura kept glancing at Sasuke the entire time, however, and once Kiba noticed it, he punished her for it. Every time she looked away, Kiba was there to bring her attention back to him with a fist or foot. This went on for half the day, until Sakura finally seemed to accept that Sasuke was paying her no mind in the least while she fought. Her body was covered in bruises, she was having trouble keeping her arms up, and something in her just snapped when Kiba clubbed her down again. She stood and took her ready stance, then glanced at where Sasuke was fighting. Kiba was already moving in, and was already fully committed to the easy hit when she screamed out a battle cry and stepped into it. His fist glanced off her arm, but his face caught her fist perfectly in return, and he tumbled nearly 3 feet back with the force of the blow. He knelt in the dust, hand covering his jaw, and looked up as Sakura, angel of death, sailed through the air at him, that silly pink dress suddenly not so silly as the woman inside of it brought down the fist of the gods themselves with the force of every muscle she could use. Kakashi had caught her arm carefully before she did something permanent to her opponent, and he was proud of the twitch he felt as she fought down the reflex to take a swing at him. He told her she was done for the day, and to come back tomorrow with the same amount of passion but a little more self-control, all while discreetly pretended he did not see the wet spot that had grown under Kiba as he stared at the curled fist inches from his eyes. On day 2 she came early to the morning training, caught Kakashi before the others arrived, and apologized. Not for smashing Kiba's face, but for not doing it sooner. She remained the same polite, slightly annoying girl during team training, but managed to only sneak glances as her crush when they were not busy. During actual training, she was focused. When the time came for the afternoon training, she started systematically demolishing her opponent. Kiba had the strength, but she had the technique, and now she had the drive. Every wild charge was rebuffed with a throw or a painful counter-strike. Kiba spent almost as much time on the ground as standing. By the end of day 2, she had spent the last 5 minutes of sparring tossing him around the clearing and letting him get up, only to slip in for another throw, deliberately practicing her ability to toss him and, at one point, counting out how many feet she threw him over the course of a minute. Kurenai had grinned when the girl counted to 10, and openly laughed when she reached 20. On day 3, Akamaru was permitted to join in the fight, and the puppy made almost no difference save for picking up some bruises of his own. By the end of the day, Kiba was furious at having not landed a single meaningful blow the entire day. He was shouting angrily as a smirking Sakura when Kakashi finally took him aside and whispered in his ear. Kiba turned to stomp away, but when Kakashi called out and said, "That's exactly why you're going to lose tomorrow," he stopped, then turned and stomped over to Sakura. Kurenai's jaw dropped when he kowtowed formally to the pink-haired girl, his forehead pressed firmly to the ground and arms spread wide as he begged her to teach him. After a moment Akamaru had trotted over and did his best to take the same pose, yapping furiously and wagging his tail. Sakura had laughed at the display and agreed. She had trained the Inuzuka boy in the academy stances and punches, but those were worthless to him, she admitted, with his clan's taijutsu stance, a hunched and animalistic stance that encouraged full-body blows. Instead of focusing on the basic strikes and throws, she focused on how they worked, and how those same principles could be applied to his own techniques. The academy strikes were too awkward to use, but knowing the forces she used to toss him around until then, he was able to take advantage and adapt the same principles to his own efforts. By day 5, Kiba had absorbed much of Sakura's knowledge on Academy Taijutsu with the aid of Kurenai during their morning sessions, and he and Akamaru started to demolish her. Knowing how to use their bodies and apply leverage properly turned the two into powerful foes, and they spent most of the day tossing the pink girl around just as hard as she had days before. It was then that Sakura returned the favor, dropping into the same begging pose, and asked Kiba to teach her how to go crazy like an Inuzuka. On day 6, Kiba arrived to group training with a scroll and showed it to Sakura. Kakashi managed a glance at it in passing, and saw it was filled with drawings of humans in various poses. They spent the day practicing the most basic of moves for the Inuzuka four-legged stance. He apologized, explaining that the stance was all he was permitted to share as it was fairly easy to figure out through observation, but the rest of his clan's techniques were forbidden to outsiders. He also quietly assured her that his family was discussing permitting her to train formally with the clan, after being impressed with his quick improvement with her aid, and they wanted to see how she did with the basic form. The image of Haruno Sakura on all fours, snarling at Kiba and Akamaru as they sailed away from her after a particularly good throw, was probably going to stay with Kakashi forever. On day 7, they gave their teams a day off to rest and relax. They spent the day comparing notes and discussing their team's progress, eventually culminating in the report that they continued to pass back and forth at the bar between drinks. "I can't believe nobody ever thought to do this," Kakashi mumbled quietly as he set the papers down. He took up his cup and turned away to sip at it, concealing his face with his hand, which always got an amusing huff from Kurenai. "I can't believe the Inuzuka were willing to teach Sakura anything from their clan," she replied, still staring at her cup. Kakashi shrugged as he placed his cup down. "They are a lot less formal than many of the clans in Konoha, and some seems to have a thing for strong women. I would not be surprised if she was watching them train at some point, and I am willing to bet money that she noticed Kiba's improvement after the first few days. Now if only we could get the Hyuga to be so open and helpful." Kurenai managed a snort at that little joke. "So," he asked, resting his chin in his hands, "glad you accepted?" She nodded and took a sip. "Shino found a good sparring partner who is respectful of his bugs and who has no objection to his quiet nature. Kiba has an appreciation for technique, and the potential strength in the other gender." She smiled sharply at that comment, as Kiba and the Inuzuka were hardly chauvinistic by nature, but his brash mannerisms often came across that way. That smile faded a little, but it did not vanish completely as Kurenai continued. "And Hinata is still very timid, but she's willing to hit at least one person now, and I think I can get Kiba and Shino to help me get her to open up more." She sighed and drained her cup, then sat back. "I think we can report this as an outstanding success to the Hokage." Kakashi raised his cup to that. Chapter 6, Finally. A mission to the wave. "I don't see it yet," said Sasuke quietly into his radio. "It'll be here," came the reply from Sakura. They were both stationed to either side of an alleyway, carefully concealing themselves. They had been lying in wait for almost an hour so far, and both were growing impatient for the operation to begin. "I can barely imagine how this must be for Naruto," thought Sakura as she shifted her limbs very slowly, one at a time, trying to stay limber despite being crouched under the eave of one of the buildings that made this alleyway. Her respect for Konoha's loud orange joke had gone up a little during their training efforts with Team 8, and had only increased as they began to progress. He might be loud, obnoxious, and incapable of taking a hint, but when he really wants to, he can tough things out. "Contact," said Sasuke, his voice little more than a whisper over the radio. Sakura shifted her eyes slightly and saw the target slowly making its way along the path. It seemed to move very slowly, confident in its graceful steps, so certain it knew the area better than anyone. Then her foot crossed a small chalk mark on the pavement. There was a sudden loud bang as Sasuke appeared, dropping a flash bomb from the small bandolier across his chest to his feet and sending out a wave of killing intent strong enough for Sakura to feel from the other end of the alley. She worried for a second that he had loaded the bomb with too much powder, as new as he was to the art, but he remained standing and unswayed by the loud blast. The target panicked, and with a scream, started running down the alleyway at her. Panic was good. Panic meant quick choices, often wrong choices, something Kakashi had worked hard to imprint on his charges. Sakura timed the target's progress carefully, then leaped in front of it and gave out a howl. The target was terrified at her appearance, and Sakura felt a jolt of pride. The last couple of months had been busy for her, but productive. Inuzuka-tsum had run her ragged, teaching her the basis of her clan's trademark taijutsu stance, not just physically, but mentally. An animal, she had said, does not condition its hair. She said this at the end of the first week, after Sakura had made the mistake of complaining about her appearance after a rough day of training in the rain. An animal does not prim, does not scrub, does not dye, does not paint. An animal is primal, its power coming from its natural state. Some had smiled at her and given her a nudge in the ribs. So does its beauty. Stop trying so hard and just be yourself. Sakura had taken this to heart. Her long hair, no longer cleaned fervently, had become a spiked, ragged, vibrant pink mane that spread across her shoulders, barely held back by the hetae she wore as a headband. When the hem of her dress had become shredded after she stepped on it a few too many times in practice, she had ripped it off and sewn the new hem herself to be level with her shorts. The work was slightly ragged and terribly uneven, but it worked, and Sakura was proud of her decision to keep it. And as she crouched on all fours snarling at the target, she could see Sasuke with a faint smile on his face. It might have been for a plan well executed, but Sakura decided it might as well be for her, and true or not, that would be enough for now. Panicked, the target screamed again and, true to Kiba's words months ago, started running up the wall to escape. "Now, Naruto!" shouted Sakura, not even bothering with the radio anymore. With a small puff of smoke, Naruto dispelled his henge transformation, all of them. The entire alleyway became slightly hazy, as the walls to either side transformed back into their original form, revealing hundreds of shadow clones, each one standing on the shoulders of the one below it, lining the entire alley. With an excited shout, the erstwhile walls curved inward, hundreds of hands snatching and grabbing at the cat as it tried to flee, screaming the entire time. Serves it right, thought Kakashi, watching from the rooftop. Damn thing will only do it again tomorrow. I wonder why it's always running away. Oh, that's why. Kakashi stared at the poor cat as Lady Shirjimi, the daimyo's wife, cuddled the poor creature half to death while proclaiming her love for the suffering beast without a trace of irony. He could feel the disgust radiating off of his team, especially Sakura, who was wincing with every screech and hiss as if she knew what it was saying. Come to think of it, he considered with a small smile, she just might at this point. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, was reading from a list of missions, each more dull and uninspiring than the last, when Naruto finally snapped. Kakashi had no idea where the game show buzzing noise was coming from as the boy crossed his arms and shouted, but he heard the quiet snirk of repressed laughter coming from the other members of the team, and more than a few from the kids' audience as well. Even the Hokage seemed amused, chuckling even as Iraka lectured Naruto on his impropriety. Hiruzen looked at Kakashi and raised an eyebrow slightly, and received a small nod in return. The old man was slightly uncertain about giving Kakashi's team a higher-ranked mission, but it was ultimately the Jonin's call, and Hiruzen had heard more than a few interesting stories about Team 7, most of them good. "We have one possible C-rank mission I may permit you to take," he said slowly, causing all of the genin to perk up slightly. "An escort for a certain person." At this, Naruto became ecstatic, and Hiruzen smirked as the boy shouted his excitement, until the drunkard walked in. If nothing else, the Hokage thought with a smile as he watched the following antics, at least the job can be amusing at times. "If I may, Hokage-sama," said Kakashi, after the bridge builder and his orange-toned genin argued for a while. Hiruzen gave him a nod, and the jonin turned to his charge. "Tazuna-san, my team is strong enough to protect you from bandits, and even if they were not, I am. However, this will also be a training opportunity for them, and I have a few last-minute instructions to give them. Would you find it acceptable to leave at dawn tomorrow?" Tazuna grunted in agreement and took another deep, slovenly chug from the bottle in his hand. "Thank you," Kakashi said with a smile. He turned to his students. "I will speak to each of you later tonight for some last-minute preparations. Meanwhile, return home and pack for a few weeks of time in the field." "Yes, sir," said his team. "Sakura," said Kakashi from her window that night. He was quite proud when her fist passed perilously close to his face as she tried to punch him instead of screaming uselessly, and more so when she curled her fingers inward to try to snatch his mask. He noted that, despite the later hour, she was dressed and ready to go, and he considered the possibility she had been waited for him to approach her this way. "Sorry, Kakashi-sensei," she said with a grin that gave an entirely different message. No problem," he said sheepishly. "I wanted you to know something before we go." He crouched on her windowsill and stared at her. "I am proud of what you are becoming," he said without preamble. She blushed, in quite a pretty manner, and he had an amusing thought as to how much trouble Mr. Haruna was going to be in once his daughter got a little older. "You have taken upon yourself the task of being a true shinobi, and at this rate, you might just become the strongest kunoichi of your generation." Her blush only deepened. "I have no training for you, except for a very specific warning." She stiffened and took a more formal stance, as befitting a soldier taking orders. We may be fighting on this mission. We may also be required to kill our foes during it. She nodded once, and swallowed nervously, her blush fading to paleness. There is no shame in reluctance to kill, but there is shame in letting another die for that reason. If the time comes, be strong, strike quickly, and sort out your emotions after we all come home. Okay? Sakura's eyes were a little dimmer as he finished his speech, but when he was done, a stillness settled over her features, and as he watched, a little steel crept into her spine and made her eyes glitter in a decidedly unladylike fashion. Understood, sensei, she said quietly, with a nod. He nodded back, and jumped back out into the night. The trouble just got twice as bad for Mr. Haruno, he thought with an internal giggle as he raced towards his next student. She might have fewer admirers, but they'll all be shinobi like her. He found Naruto at Ichiraku's, naturally. He listened on the roof for a few minutes as Naruto chatted on about anything that came to mind while the owner and his daughter prepared his food, then dropped down and slipped into a stool. Naruto's spit take, once he noticed Kakashi's presence, was enough to make everyone else laugh. Hey Naruto, I got you something. Kakashi reached behind his back and offered the genin a package. The boy took it and hurriedly opened it, then pulled out the dark green cloak Kakashi had picked up a few weeks ago. It had a slight pattern to it in shades of darker green, but even in the good light at the ramen stand, they were hard to make out. I don't get it, said Naruto suspiciously. Naruto, sometimes it's good to stand out, especially when you're Konoha's #1 unpredictable ninja. Naruto grinned at the title, rightfully earned 3 years of pranks. You are durable and getting quite strong for your age, Naruto. There will be times that you will want to draw attention and draw attacks, because in the end, you can take a beating that your teammates can't, thanks to your special training. Naruto nodded carefully. He had yet to tell anyone else about the beast sealed within him, not even Tsuchi and Ayam, and Kakashi seemed to respect his choice. There are other times, however, Kakashi continued with a smile, where an orange jumpsuit is a bad idea. Like on stealth missions. Or assassination missions. Or most missions. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, but Kakashi waved him down. I don't ask you to stop with the orange, Naruto, but you might want to have the option of hiding yourself. Naruto sighed, and mumbled. Yeah, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi reached out and ruffled the boy's hair, then laughed lightly when the blonde glared at him. His glare died, however, when Tsuchi stepped up with a bowl and said loudly, A wise piece of advice, Naruto. And in gratitude for it, I am sure your sensei will be glad to buy you a bowl. While Naruto dug in, Tsuchi gave Kakashi a small wink, and received one back. If anything was likely to reinforce a lesson on Naruto, it was a bowl of his favorite ramen, and they both had discussed this a few weeks ago. Kakashi had a standing account now at Ichiraku's, and found the money to be well spent to reinforce some of his lessons. Kakashi bid them goodnight, and with a last reminder of the early day tomorrow, he left to find his last student. Kakashi did not even bother trying to sneak up on Sasuke, simply landing a few feet away and approaching the boy, who was standing on a dock looking out into a lake near his family property. He was pleased to see Sasuke had some new additions to his bandolier and made a mental note to ask the boy about the markings on the various canisters and pouches. Many shinobi used a personal code to obfuscate the chemicals and poisons they used, and Kakashi approved, but sometimes he worried that Sasuke's teammates might need that information when the boy was unavailable. What? Asked Sasuke as soon as Kakashi approached, blunt but at least not particularly unfriendly. Nothing, said Kakashi as he approached. I only wanted to dash. Whatever he wanted remained unsaid as the kunai sank deep into his forehead. Sasuke turned, guard already rising, and saw him. That man. That murderer. He stood out on the lake, black robes billowing, another short blade in hand, his eyes glowing red. Sasuke didn't even think. He just attacked, charging into the lake and screaming in his fury. The man threw his kunai with a casual flick, scoring a line across Sasuke's cheek, but even that did not deter Sasuke in his charge. He lashed out with a flying kick, but his foe caught it, casually taking the blow to his palm without moving an inch, his hands crushingly painful as they grasped Sasuke's ankle. Sasuke palmed an explosive in his right hand ready to throw it, but again he was countered, his foe grabbing his hand and holding it tight until the fuse burned down and blew Sasuke's hand off. Sasuke screamed, and did not stop screaming until he landed with a thump on the edge of the lake. You're still too weak, said his brother, without passion, without hate, as he walked to the shoreline. You're still far too weak. He pulled out another kunai and pulled back his arm to throw it. Join your family then, he said as he flicked it at Sasuke's left eye. I can't die like this. The kunai sailed at him, as time slowed to a near stop, the world distorting slightly as Sasuke focused hard on his oncoming death. He began to turn away, certain he could not evade the blow, but the kunai slowed even further, and he found himself moving faster, much faster than he thought possible. The blade hit the ground next to his face. Sasuke turned to look at it, but the blade looked wrong. The edges were rough, slightly nicked and pitted, something his brother would never allow to happen to his tools. When he turned to his brother, the man's face felt wrong. The curves of his eyes, the shape of his cheekbones, even the curve of his jaw was just slightly off, giving the impression of another person wearing an elaborate Itachi mask. And out in the lake, two figures, visible only by the faintest of outlines against the shimmering water, were standing patiently. Sasuke stood and brushed some dirt off his cloths with his completely undamaged hands, then walked out onto the water. He passed through the false brother like the illusion it was and stopped before the figures. "Kakashi," he growled. The figures shimmered, revealing Kakashi and Kurenai. She looked slightly perturbed, but Kakashi, his sensei, looked extremely pleased with himself. Kakashi nodded to Kurenai, who gave Sasuke an apologetic glance before leaving the area. Sasuke watched her until she was out of sight, then rounded on his teacher, crossed his arms, and waited for an explanation. "I have taught you every strength I could," said Kakashi quietly. "Do you remember me teaching you the strength of the toolmaker?" Sasuke nodded. They had sparred one evening, and Kakashi had casually dropped a flashbang in front of him, blinding him for half the night. He had been angry, until Kakashi asked if, faced with his brother, such a thing would disable his most powerful technique, however briefly. Sasuke had acknowledged the point, and was trained how to make some of the simpler but exotic tools of the shinobi world. "Do you remember me teaching you the strength of the strategist?" Sasuke nodded, and colored just slightly. Kakashi had conned him into playing a game of Go with Nara Shikamaru, and after an embarrassingly short game, had explained that Shikamaru had pulled it off with nothing but his facility for planning ahead. Training to think was difficult, and Sasuke knew he had a lot more training to go, but at times, just knowing he needed to plan ahead helped. In hindsight, he had been little better than the dobe, dashing into fights under nothing more than the assumption that he was strong, and any foe he faced must be weak. "Do you remember me teaching you the strength of the team?" Sasuke grunted, and flushed much deeper at that memory. After the first week of training, Kakashi had asked him if he could take on his team, 2-1, and he had said yes without a thought. When the match began, he had sprung at Sakura with a flying kick, intending to put her down immediately to focus on Naruto. She had grabbed his ankle, and rather than trying to hurt him directly, had simply rotated him slightly as he passed by. He was still trying to figure out why she did so little when Naruto's fist had hit him in the back of the head. He had awakened at the hospital. Sakura was apologetic, but instead of being a weak, gushing mess, she had simply apologized politely, if repeatedly. After the dobe also apologized for hitting him a little too hard. They had shared a high five and mocked him mercilessly for underestimating them. Kakashi had stayed on after they left, and pointed out that their strength was also his strength, if he stopped worrying about how he got his revenge and simply put all of his effort into making sure it happened at all. "Why listen to your brother's advice on how to kill him," said Kakashi, his voice laden with scorn, "when he was nothing but a traitor?" It had taken several days, and a lot of effort, but Sasuke did his best to get along with his team. He had offered to take them to lunch one afternoon, a little wary of their reaction, and they had both frozen in place in shock. Eventually he convinced the two of them to just go along with it, and they spent a relatively pleasant afternoon together. And once the initial shock wore off and the two of them calmed down, he found himself admitting they were at least more tolerable now. Naruto had been less stupidly aggressive when Sasuke stopped mocking him at every turn, and Sakura was less annoyingly clingy once he stopped ignoring her. It had taken him nearly a week before he managed to stop them from stomping all over him during their spars, and that victory only lasted a day before the two of them had come up with something new and crushed him again. Their fights had become a cycle of innovation versus talent, and with each cycle, they became harder and harder to beat. Kakashi nodded once, to acknowledge Sasuke's embarrassment, and raises his Hatake, revealing his Sharingan. "I had Kurenai come and perform this genjutsu on you for a reason. Tomorrow, for the first time, we may face real and dangerous foes, and while I expect little more than bandits and other riffraff, that does not mean the danger will not be real. The Sharingan does not manifest until the first time the owner believes themselves in great danger. This is generally when the owner is fighting for their lives, which is a terrible place to suddenly gain a perception-warping jujutsu." Despite her reservations, Kurenai agreed with my reasoning and was willing to help. "You may want to consider thanking her later." Sasuke grunted, but nodded in agreement. "Well, congratulations," said Kakashi with a smile. "I know your clan would often celebrate when a member gained the clan's famed power. I also know you have no desire for me to throw you a party over it. But if nothing else, you now have a vital tool against your brother, and that at least I am sure you can appreciate. He gave the genin a gentle pat on the shoulder and started to walk away. Kakashi, he heard Sasuke say quietly. He stopped walking and waited. Thanks. Kakashi nodded once, and with a short wave, vanished, leaving Sasuke alone to think. Chapter 7: The Demon Brothers Attack. Kakashi noticed the puddle immediately. It was hard not to. The thing was laying directly in their path, so close they would almost step on it in passing. From the sudden, if muffled intake of breath, he guessed that Sakura had noticed it as well. Nice to know she's not so engrossed with the conversation that she lost her senses. Kakashi gave a slight cough, just a quick clearing of the throat, and was proud that none of the others showed any reaction other than a slight hitch in their breath. Still, he had to admit it took a big brass pair to be so blatant about such a trap. Any fresh genin squad and even a few higher-ranked shinobi Kakashi could think of might not have noticed, while someone with more experience might notice and write off the hidden ninja as incompetent. It was an excellent tactic, designed to either ambush the weak, or make the strong underestimate their foes until it was too late. If anyone appreciated the dangers of underestimating others, it was Kakashi. When two shinobi clad in rebreathers and wearing a pair of matched iron gauntlets flowed up out of the false puddle, Kakashi didn't even bother to turn towards them. He gave a second cough, quietly, and got an answering grunt from Sasuke, a grumble from Naruto, and a stirring rendition of a popular song in whistle form from Sakura. Right, he thought as he heard the metallic clink that signified the attack. Let's see how they do. A simple, classic kawarimi was enough to escape the trap, with their foes none the wiser as they mercilessly destroyed the log he swapped himself for. Oh good chumps, he thought as he watched them from the forest. Kakashi could not even remember the last time the body replacement technique went unnoticed by his opponents, which bode poorly for them. One down, the two ninja proclaimed as they destroyed the jonin, his shredded body tumbling to the ground behind them. They smirked to themselves under their rebreathers and leaped at the shortest one, chains cutting the air. He was only just beginning to turn towards them as they reached out to rend his body. Two, they said in unison. Sure, the little orange-covered kid said quietly, a small smile on his face. There was a flash of pink and a frightful shout from one side of the demon brothers as Sakura took to the fight. She launched herself at Gozu, arms crossed. He raised his unchained arm in defense, detaching the chain between himself and his kin as he did so, only to have her collide with him, not merely with her fist, but with her entire body weight. He stumbled back a couple steps, his momentum only checked by his brother, who reached out with his unbladed hand to catch his sibling. A second flash, this one blue, passed in front of the two ninja. The second child was just slow enough that the men could see the smirk on his face as he passed. Their eyes followed his form long enough to see him dashing further away from them. They sagged slightly, their guard dropping just a little in reaction to the missed attack, and their eyes tracked back towards the pink girl, who had spun away in that time, covering her ears with her hands, obviously terrified. A smirk slowly started to form on their faces under their masks at the cowering girl, and the smile remained until their eyes stopped moving, focused dead ahead, on the small cylinder that was still rising slightly from where Sasuke had tossed it in passing. The flash of light as the small explosive lit off was terrible in itself, no meager single flash but a series of flashes that crossed the colors of the rainbow twice over at an intensity strong enough to be blinding through their eyelids. As bad as the lights were, however, the sound was that much worse. It was a gruesome noise, loud bangs intermixed with piercing whistles and thudding bass rumbles that pushed at their chests. The demon brothers flinched away, eyes fluttering as they tried to blink away the afterimages, unable to hear the slight scuff as the orange boy finally completed his turn, now that the flashbang had done its job. Meizu didn't hear or see a thing as Naruto firmly kicked as hard as he could between the man's legs, but he certainly felt it. Kakashi had started a grueling physical regimen after the first week of sparring with Team 8, and he pushed nobody harder than Naruto, knowing full well that his excessive healing ability permitted him to be pushed to the limit, time and time again. But where he had been working on Sakura's somewhat shoddy reflexes and Sasuke's speed, Naruto was getting nothing but strength training. Between this and Naruto's much improved food intake, the young man was already beginning to become a physical powerhouse. Meizu rose a full 3 inches from the ground, which would seem unimpressive were the blow not coming from someone half his own height. He landed on his knees, then dropped to the ground, twitching. While writing his report on the mission later, Kakashi would swear he'd heard the musical ding of a boxing bell at that very moment, but he never found out where the sound came from, so it never made it into his official report. Gozu felt the thump of his brother hitting the ground and blindly jumped away. He sailed off towards the trees, intent on simply fleeing faster than these genin could possibly follow. Unfortunately for him, He landed less than a foot from Kakashi's hiding space, and in an almost friendly fashion, the white-haired Jonin nailed him with a lariat and latched on, holding the unconscious man up by his neck. "Good work, team," he said, walking out of the tree line to dump the two captives into a pile. "You fought well, especially against a pair of chunin like these two." He looked at Naruto, and frowned. "I expected you to react a little faster, though, Naruto." Naruto smirked and blew a raspberry at the pair of nuke-nin on the ground. "Sakura is faster than I am, and so is Sasuke. I knew they'd be there soon enough." He scratched the back of his head sheepishly and glanced at Sasuke. "I've seen enough of Sasuke team surprises to know by the time I turned around, I'd just have to turn around again." He perked up a little and pumped his fist in the air. "But we got them, didn't we? Databeo." Sasuke grunted at the cheering orange menace, but he managed a small smile. "So," he said quietly, shrugging his shoulders, "I blinded them with science, Sakura attacked them with all her might, and you played Aroshambo with them?" He looked away, feigning distaste. "Classy," he mumbled. This set Naruto off, and he began shouting at his rival and friend over the insult. Kakashi tied up the two fallen shinobi and stepped away for a moment to discreetly summon one of his dogs to run a message to Konoha. Tazuna tried to bring his heartbeat under control with more than a fair bit of his remaining sake. And Sakura stood in the midst of it all, unmoved, trying not to stare at Sasuke as the blush continued to glow on her cheeks, giving away the fact that her one true love had just given her the biggest compliment she thought she could ever hear from him. It took a little while, but as soon as Kakashi pointed out that dishonesty voided their contract and he could, in theory, simply leave Tazuna alone with the slowly recovering shinobi he had tied to a tree nearby, the man spilled it. He explained all he knew about Gato and his crushing grip on the economy of the Land of Waves, the threats to his family and his workers, and his desperation to finish this one work and free his land. "I suspect this is a bit beyond you," Kakashi said, addressing his team. "In general, genin are not exposed to battles with other shinobi without significantly more experience. And we are certainly not getting paid enough for this." He turned to the shivering bridge builder who was standing beside him. "However, I do not like the idea of simply leaving you to die, even if you were grossly inaccurate in the details of the mission. But it is not just my life that might be at stake." He turned to his team and raised his one visible eyebrow. Sasuke was first to state his opinion on the matter. "We may as well keep going. You're here to help us, we're well rested, and as prepared as we're going to be. We'll have to face other shinobi eventually, we may as well do so now, while circumstances are with us." Kakashi nodded, and turned to Sakura, who gave him an easy shrug and ruffled her hair with her hands, helping it air out. "This is dangerous, Kakashi-sensei, but I think we can handle it. We managed to take these two out, and they were well above our level too. With any luck, our other foes might just underestimate us as well." Kakashi nodded, then flashed forward, a kunai appearing in his hands. In mere moments he was in front of the pink-haired girl, blade posed to kill, and he almost jumped as one of Sasuke's little surprises passed inches from his exposed eye, cap still firmly in place and fuse unlit. Sakura had not flinched in the least and was staring at him with an almost feral glee, as if this was planned, and Kakashi seriously wondered if his cute little genin squad really had planned it at some point. "I guess all those teamwork exercises did help," Kakashi thought cheerfully as he stepped back and nodded. And at least Sasuke cared enough to intervene. "We might die, all of us, for taking this path." "Wait!" shouted Naruto, stomping his feet in the dirt. "What about me? Aren't you gonna ask me my opinion?" Kakashi turned back to Naruto. "Are you saying you don't want to keep going?" Naruto shook his head with a frown. "So, you want to keep going?" Naruto crossed his arms, made as stern and serious of a face he could, and nodded. "Then why are you standing here complaining?" Sasuke grunted and reached out to give his teammate a light slap in the back of the head, and to the sound of Naruto's sputtering fury, he started walking down the road. Naruto rushed to catch up, but drew to a stop when Kakashi reached out and snagged his collar. "Sakura," said Kakashi, nodding down the road. "Go with Sasuke and Tazuna. Naruto and I need to have a discussion." She gave a small nod, and jogged to catch up. Tazuna followed after a quick glance at the remaining two ninja. "Naruto," said Kakashi quietly when the others were several meters away. "Let's talk about your contribution to the team." Naruto swallowed heavily. Chapter 8: Assassin in the Mists. When they stepped onto the dock, Team 7 let out a collective sigh, each for their own reasons. Sasuke sighed in relief. The crossing had been done slowly, with the speed of but a single oar to remain silent. For all of his posturing, Kakashi had been fairly tense, as had Tazuna and the boat owner, and Sasuke thought he had a good grasp of why. Out in the water, Only Kakashi would be able to fight in any meaningful manner, and an ambush would be easy to arrange in such a thick mist. Sakura sighed in mild distaste as she looked around the small town they had landed in. It looked like an acceptable place to live, and she was proud of herself in that she found no objection to the dirt that seemed to be ground into the surface of every object she could see. Dirt was a sign of work, and no real industrial or farming village could look as clean as Konoha on even their best day. But the cracks in the walls, the ancient peeling paint, the rough wood used for patchwork, all of these spoke of long neglect. Even the power lines and poles looked to be held together with rough patchwork and shoddy repairs, and in an area of wooden housing, that could make this place a death trap. Naruto sighed in discomfort. The trip had been long, and Kakashi had given him a direct and serious order to remain silent and largely immobile the entire trip. He had handed Naruto a small pile of leaves and had instructed him to practice the leaf concentration technique, holding a leaf to his forehead with nothing but his chakra. Unlike the academy, however, this time he had to do it with a literal twist, rotating the leaves slowly and consistently in a circle, like a clock. The first dozen leaves had spiraled into the water before Naruto managed to get them to remain on his forehead, and he had spent the remainder of the trip silently trying to even out the speed, staring over the front of the boat as they traveled. And used to such an activity, his back was now stiff, and he stretched several times trying to work out all the kinks. Kakashi nodded to the boat captain when the man decided to take them no further, then looked at Tazuna. "Well now," he said, his voice high and cheerful. "Maybe we should find a place to have a nice meal before we set off, Tazuna?" Tazuna blushed and turned away at the foreign shinobi's faux pas. Asking for a restaurant in a place as poor as this was a ghastly thing to do, but in turning away at that moment, the bridge builder missed the subtle hand signal Kakashi flashed to his team. Naruto did not miss the signal. He nodded quietly, and then loudly proclaimed his need to find a restroom as soon as possible, clutching at his gut and hopping around in distress, causing Sasuke and Sakura to lean away from him in disgust. Tazuna sighed and started leading the group in the direction of the nearest restroom he could remember in this town, and never saw the look that Kakashi and Naruto shared. 20 minutes later, quite relieved, the five of them left the public restroom to begin their journey to Tazuna's home. 20 minutes later, exactly as relieved, the five of them left the public restroom. 2 hours later, the last group of the five of them left the public restroom. "Kakashi-sensei! You're the best!" shouted Naruto as they walked down the road, arms behind his head and a great smirk on his face. Sakura agreed loudly, and even Sasuke managed a grunt of agreement at that. "Using all those shadow clones as decoys was genius!" The blonde continued to shout, chuckling loudly. Kakashi turned to him and smiled. "You see how powerful misdirection is now, Naruto?" Naruto cheered enthusiastically, causing his teammates and Tazuna to lean away from him. "And do you know what makes misdirection even more powerful?" asked Kakashi, turning his attention away from Forest to address his charges. Naruto leaned forward, eyes glittering at the prospect of more wisdom from his incredible sensei. Kakashi shot his cute little genin a big smile, and said cheerfully, "Not shouting out your tactics for everyone to hear." "I agree," came the deep voice from the surrounding trees, even as the great sword came whistling through the air. Sakura managed to throw herself into Tazuna, knocking him out of the way, while everyone else jumped out of line to avoid the spinning sword. Kakashi tracked the sword with his eye until it hit a nearby tree with a resounding crack, sticking far enough into the tree to support the ninja who landed on it. The man was thickly muscled, a fact evident due to his bare chest and back. He wore only some pants and a set of leg and arm warmers in a blotchy black and white camouflage pattern. He turned from where he stood, back to the Konoha team, and they saw that his face was masked with white bandages, showing only his eyes and spiked brown hair, blowing softly in the breeze. "Your genin are quite astute to have noticed and dodged my attack, Sharingan Kakashi, but they talk far too much for ninja. Not that it mattered, making that many clones, the last set would have to be the real ones, which my intel made sure to watch for. Rest assured I will let them flee like the little false ninja they are after you're dead, if they turn over the bridge builder to me." Kakashi drew a pair of kunai and took a ready stance. "It seems you have me at an advantage. Who are you exactly?" "Why do you ask?" said the mysterious ninja. "To know what to etch on your tombstone," said Kakashi with a smile. The bare-chested shinobi laughed at this, a deep, strong, and surprisingly warm chuckle for such a stern figure. "Very well," he said from his perch. "I will give you the name of your killer. I am Momochi Zabuza, formerly of Kirigakure. Are you sure you want to fight? There is no shame in yielding to a threat such as myself." Kakashi spared a glance at his genin, and found them shivering but in control and ready to fight. Even Tazuna seemed willing to go against this foe. He grunted once, then looked up at the tree and smiled. "I think not," he said. Zabuza nodded in acknowledgement, even as the mist began to rise and fill the road and forest, growing impossibly thick. Then I will show you why I am called the demon of the hidden mist, Kakashi. He made a hand sign, and the mist rose and concealed his form, turning the entire roadway white. Flee, you three, said Kakashi, stepping into the mist. Keep the client alive! Sasuke and Sakura immediately grabbed Tazuna between them and started to run, but Naruto simply stared at Kakashi's fading form. Like hell I'll run! He shouted at the mists, drawing his own kunai. I'm no coward! I'll fight you here and now! As you wish, Zabuza said quietly behind the blonde as he brought his blade across and through the boy's body, not even bothering to watch the child die. Naruto blinked in the sunlight and looked up at Kakashi, walking calmly ahead of him. Sensei, he said, sorting out his memories. One of the teams has been hit. Someone named Zabuza. Mocha? Muchi? Momochi Zabuza, thought Kakashi. Jonin ranked, and a rank earned through blood, not mission ranks and friendly competitions. We're in for a fight, eventually. Which team? He asked, giving the surrounding area a little more scrutiny in case the foe was close. The last one, Sensei. Kakashi held out his hand, and Tazuna grunted before slapping his last bottle of sake into the Jonin's hand. Never make a bet you can't bear to lose, said Kakashi, tossing the bottle to smash against a tree, splashing the alcohol around the area. Tell me, he asked his students, why did he hit the last group? Sakura spoke up when the other two said nothing. Naruto had a studious but laughable look on his face, while Sasuke wore his traditional look of bored indifference, although Sakura thought they were both thinking carefully. For almost any ninja, the only way to make that many teams would be to use standard clones, which are simplistic and incapable of further jutsu. The last team to leave the restroom would almost have to be the real versions, and if an observer happened to notice them leaving and saw them interacting with the world physically, they would likely assume that the last ones were the real ones. Kakashi nodded, and looked at Naruto expectantly. He was still frowning, and Kakashi imagined he could hear the ungreased wheels of the blonde's mind squeaking under the unusual effort he was making. Finally, something seemed to snap free, and his eyes widened. But because my shadow clones can perform jutsu, and interact with the world physically, it's harder to notice that they are fake. You made us leave first, because you know anyone watching would assume the first group to leave would be fakes of some sort. Very good, Naruto, Sakura. It's good to see you both have a grasp of what we did and why. Sakura smiled, and Naruto grinned hard at such a small praise. Kakashi sent a glance to Sasuke, and saw the glint in the boy's eyes as he thought about the situation. Sasuke was thinking hard, but not on the same thing as everyone else. This is impossible, he thought over and over, a litany of disbelief that did nothing to change the fact that he had heard the plan Kakashi had presented to them in the public bathroom they had ducked into. Naruto made shadow clones to henge into copies of us, and they got orders to make more copies, but Kakashi never said. Dope, said Sasuke quietly. When Naruto looked at him, still grinning, Sasuke asked that he really needed to know. How many teams did you send out? Naruto thought for a moment, and his grin got bigger. 6 teams. I wanted to do more, but Kakashi-sensei insisted they be able to fight and run for at least a day, so I had to be careful not to— What? Sasuke and Sakura were staring at him. 6 teams, Sakura thought, her estimation of her occasionally stupid teammate raising as she did the math. 30 clones, capable of lasting a full day or more and fighting. The team had leaned on Naruto's shadow clone technique plenty of times in the past, using them for manual labor in spars, but banished clones returned their chakra to their owner, so she'd assumed they were only capable of low-key physical labor. But if all of those clones could operate that long and fight with jutsu, then he's on a whole different level, Sasuke was thinking at the same time. But where Sakura was shocked and pleasantly surprised, Sasuke was now grinding his teeth. With that level of power, I could easily have my vengeance. His thoughts were interrupted when Kakashi laid a hand on his shoulder gently, and the man leaned in to whisper quietly in his ear. Don't forget who tends to win in your spars. Power is only as useful as the person who controls it, and chakra is not the only source of power. Kakashi gave the young man a pat on the shoulder and stood back to observe. Sasuke nodded and forced his jaw to relax. Their power is my power, he repeated to himself, the words Kakashi had instilled into him after his disastrous first loss against the two of them. He realized that his angry thoughts had not been hidden as well as he hoped, and both of his teammates were looking at him with pity. No, not pity, concern, according to Kakashi. He blew out a single deep breath, then held out his arm, fist closed, at Naruto. Your use of the clones is getting better dead last. Don't think I'll go easy on you, just because you're useful. I'll run you into the ground. Naruto glared at the black-haired Uchiha for a moment, before he laughed and bumped fists with him. You're on team. Well, Kakashi said, taking the lead again. We should get to Tazuna's in an hour. With any luck, Zabuza will be busy until then. Hours later, after they had reached Tazuna's home and settled for a meal, Naruto stiffened. Kakashi-sensei, he said quietly. Kakashi looked at him. Zabuza just finished off the clone of you on the last team. Ah, said Kakashi, lifting his chopsticks, amused to notice how hard Sakura was trying to see how he ate through his mask. He hunted down the other teams then? Naruto frowned in confusion. Eh? No, Baka-sensei, he finished the clone of you on the last team. He looked over at his teammates in time to see Sakura's chopsticks hit the table from where they fell from her hands. Sasuke's mouth was open, 4 inches from it, and his eyes were narrowing. What? Even Kakashi had to work to keep his voice even. How did you manage that exactly? Naruto shrugged. Well, once the first clone disguised as you got trapped in a position where he couldn't escape, he kinda made more clones before taking the hit. Where are they? Bellowed Zabuza, leaping through the trees, eyes searching. The fight with Kakashi had been brutal. The man had been insane, abandoning any concept of defense for pure, all-out attack and forcing Zabuza into a defensive position. He had shown no inclination to use jutsu in the fight, even after Zabuza had cut down his student. But Zabuza did not earn his title by being a pushover, and he had eventually regained the initiative. Even as he brought the blade around for a blow he knew Kakashi could not dodge, his foe had made a 2-handed sign, and 4 copies of him formed, even as the original dissipated in a puff of chakra smoke. That's when Zabuza realized that he never so much as heard the first genin's body hit the ground. The fight had become hectic as he cut down clone after clone, more appearing with every stroke. Every gambit he made, every trick and trap and technique he used to try and draw out the real Kakashi, caught only more clones. He took several blows, including a few unpleasantly deep but non-lethal cuts in his legs when one clone used the death of 4 of his kind to make a suicide lunge with a pair of kunai. Zabuza had tagged the clone with the pommel of his blade, but not before the kunai had sunk into his legs. The fight had only ended when the final clone raised his hands in the now familiar seal and vanished with a look of surprise. When Zabuza let the mist fade and saw that not a single body was in sight, he had started screaming, and he had not stopped, not in the 20 minutes he had been following the trail of the rest of the team. His screams echoed through the woods, and got louder with every flex of his legs and every drop of his blood that fell from them. They hurt terribly, but in his fury, he found the strength to ignore the pain. As he approached the fleeing team, leaping from tree to tree, he saw the pink-haired brat was carrying the bridge builder across her back, giving the children a little more speed. But not enough, he thought with a great deal of satisfaction. Kakashi obviously left with another group, assuming his clone could hold me off long enough to return. Why else would they bother fleeing with the builder, slowing them down as they tried to escape? I bet they hoped I would find and focus on Kakashi once I figured out his clone trick, so they left the dead weight with the weaker party. Zabuza hurled his blade as soon as they came in range, and the 2 genins split up. The black-haired boy in blue turned to face him, while the girl continued to flee. Another clone, Zabuza figured, grinning beneath his mask. He charged forward, ignoring the clone's weak attack to deliver a simple but powerful punch to dispel it. The pink-haired girl had stopped running and set the bridge builder down to better fight her foe. Unlike the others, she took up a wide stance, arms raised like a prizefighter. Might be a real one, thought Zabuza, slowing his charge to consider his next move. Then he saw a flash of fast-moving color to his right, and laughed. The first Saban needle hit Tazuna in the temple, a perfect strike, and he dispelled. No. The pink girl turned to the new attacker, stance shifting awkwardly, like she had never used the style before. No. Her eyes widened slightly as Haku flew at her, arm outstretched and Saban already in flight. Her mouth opened slightly as if to say something, then the needle hit, in the middle of her forehead, and she dispelled as well. No! Zabuza screamed in animalistic fury and started to lash out at his surroundings. Naruto looked up from his nearly empty plate. The last one on the first team just popped. How? Sakura was whispering, and looking at Naruto. Impossible, was all she could think. How many times did the clones replicate? Naruto looked confused. How do I ask him how many iterations he had, she thought for a moment. He is like a child, not enough vocab, oh right. Pretend they were having children, she said quickly, before he got too confused. And each time they split, it was the next generation for that clone. How many generations did the clone have, at most? If the last clone was the last child, what was its relation to the original? Naruto paused and started counting in his head. Original had split into 6, call them first generation, then G1-2 had split into 4 to take that second blow. It took Naruto almost 30 seconds to sort out the many memories he had received, determining who was next to die based on their position on the battlefield when they appeared. The very last one was his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But when he tried to make another set, he ran out of chakra. He looked at the wide-eyed stares the table was giving him, and sunk deeper into his seat. I think, he mumbled. Sakura's mind buzzed. 10 iterations, after the original 20. Each iteration split the clone's chakra at least by half if not more. Impossible. Sakura stood and walked out of the house without a word. Kakashi found Sakura out at the end of the dock. He crept up on her at first, observing her, and saw she was not crying or shaking. Just thinking, very carefully. He felt a little warm pride creep into his chest with the realization that her reaction was at least partially because of him. He allowed himself to move towards her without his customary stealth, eventually sitting on the dock next to her. She was still motionless, her eyes tracking back and forth, following what was going on inside her head. He waited quietly, enjoying the peaceful night. What is he, Kakashi-sensei? Kakashi nodded to himself. Not an unexpected conversation, really. You mean who, Sakura? Sakura turned and stared at him, eyes blazing. No, Kakashi, I mean what? The loss of the honorific was not missed by Kakashi, nor was her angry tone. He has more chakra than any ninja I know of. The Hokage. The Sannin. Every academy teacher, every ninja I know. That's not separate, Kakashi, that's combined. She looked down at the water. What is he? He shrugged. He is Naruto, the Great Orange Prank, #1 surprising shinobi of Konoha. He looked down at her in the watery reflection, and saw the first hint of fear in her eyes. Sakura, he said quietly, drawing her attention. She looked up, barely formed tears in her eyes, tears she was fighting with all of her might to keep in. Good girl, he thought approvingly. I know from where Naruto gets his power. He is human, very much so, but he does have one advantage, one that gives him a great deal of raw power. Although technically incorrect, consider it a sort of bloodline limit. Akekei Genkai? She asked, using the formal title for the genetic powers that many shinobi bloodlines had. Her voice was slightly odd, but it's still wavering. Kakashi nodded in reply. What is it? She asked. I cannot say. Sakura whirled in place, bending into her four-legged stance and snarling at her teacher. Kakashi raised his hands, waving them downwards in a placating manner. No need to get like that, Sakura. I really cannot say. It is a capital crime to tell you what it is. She stood slowly from her fighting stance. A capital crime? Yes. Kakashi stood and dusted some imaginary dirt from his pants. The only one that can tell you is Naruto, and frankly, he is already terrified that you and Sasuke will think he's a monster. I can't stop you from asking, he said, turning to face some bushes near the start of the dock. But I can suggest that you not do so. Sasuke stepped out from the bushes, hands still in pockets. You're saying that the dobe is too scared to tell us why he's so strong, said Sasuke. It was not phrased as a question. Kakashi nodded in reply, and Sasuke scoffed. Idiot, he said, turning back towards the house and walking away. Sakura started jogging to catch up to Sasuke, who was moving at a slow walk, the same walk he used every time he was with a teammate, one designed to convey disdain at a slow pace while inadvertently encouraging others to catch up. The same one he uses when he wants a teammate with him, Sakura translated in her head, but he's too obstinate to admit it. Where are you going? Called Kakashi. To ask, of course. She called back to her teacher. Sakura knocked politely at the door to the boy's bedroom and waited for a reply. When none came, she knocked again, then opened the door slightly. Naruto, she said quietly. Can we talk? She heard him grumble, but it wasn't a no, so she slipped inside. Naruto was sitting with his back to the wall, staring out the window opposite from him. The moon outside was bright, and its light shining through the window screen covered his face like a fence made of shadows. Or a cage, she thought as she sat down in front of him. They sat in silence for nearly a minute, and in that time, Naruto never looked away from the window. Sakura could see him quite clearly, and several times his jaw moved slightly, as if he wanted to speak. You can tell us, she said. You say that now, he mumbled, still refusing to look at her. But once I tell you, you'll be like the rest. You'll nod and smile when you have to, but when nobody else looks, you'll whisper and point and mock. Back in the academy, you already were like that to me. Just like the rest. He didn't sound angry or spiteful to Sakura. He just seemed very tired. There was a few moments of silence. Sakura wanted to deny what he had said about her, but she knew damned well she couldn't. Before they really became a team, she had looked down on the loud-mouthed blonde, just as most of the other students had. She decided to ignore his point for now, although she knew they'd have to talk about it eventually. "It's that bad?" she asked. He nodded, and his eyes finally met hers. "Dear Cammy," she thought, staring into his eyes. "He really is terrified." She broke eye contact, looking at the floor, giving herself time to think. He was annoying, and loud, and brash, and uncouth. But he was also friendly, and loyal, and outgoing. He was, when all was said and done, a friend, possibly a very good friend, and in his eyes she had seen his fear, and she half suspected it was fear of losing what little he had. If enough people treated him as he had said. "I need to ask something else then," she said quietly. "I don't want to pry, Naruto. I really don't. We're friends, even if I do get a little physical when I get angry at you." She was suddenly feeling very guilty about that last part, but in the light of the moon, he saw him smile, just a little, and with the way he and Sasuke fought, she figured he'd be okay with the occasional thump. She gave him a small smile back, then schooled her face back into a calm, neutral state. "But whatever is going on with you, I need to know, is it safe? Is it controlled?" She felt crushed when he frowned at her, but she sat up straighter and waited for his answer. Kekkei Genkai were not always safe for the user, or for those around them, and some families that carried them were famed for their mental instability or social problems. She didn't want to ask, but in the same vein, she had to know if she needed to be on the lookout, in case he became a danger. Finally, Naruto nodded. "My problem was dangerous, at one point. But it should not be a danger anymore, according to Kakashi." He scratched the back of his head. "I don't know what all might be involved, actually. I've been told very little about my condition. Right now, aside from details, all it's really done is made me have a lot of chakra, and help heal me from injuries. That's why you were able to spar so much with Hinata, isn't it?" Naruto nodded, and managed a small grin. Damn, Sakura thought, remembering a couple conversations she'd had with the Hyuga a few weeks before, I owe her an apology now. She really was hitting him. "Okay," she said, standing up to leave. "You know, if you ever really want to talk about it." Naruto yawned and scooted over to his mattress. "Maybe later. Thanks, Sakura-chan." Sakura smiled as she opened the door. "Honorific and all. Guess he is all right." "Sure," she said, shutting the door quietly. "Anytime." She then walked down the stairs, where she had convinced Sasuke to wait for her, having explained that "Hey, Dobe, why are you so powerful?" was insufficient for the importance of the conversation. Sasuke opened the door some time later. He stepped into the room and laid down on his mattress without so much as a grunt. After a few moments, he tilted his head slightly. "Hey, Dobe," he said in a whisper. "Yeah?" "Whatever it is, you're still a Dobe." Naruto grinned under the cover of darkness. "Thanks, team." "I made a mistake, Haku." "How so?" asked Haku, preparing to tend to his master's legs. The cuts had been painful but harmless early on. Then Zabuza had started to rage and demolish a small section of the forest. The cuts had ripped deeper, and Haku had been forced to stun Zabuza with a few senbon until he could stop the bleeding. Now he had no choice but to stitch up the injuries, and he was heating the thick needle he was intending to use for the job over a lit candle to sterilize it. He watched his master and savior through the flame of the candle, staring at the man's face, unwrapped for once. "I underestimated Sharingan Kakashi." Zabuza spat, quite literally, and glared at the wall as Haku prepared the thread and needle. "I will not do this again." He picked up a small stick covered in teeth marks from the healer's kit, then laid back and set the stick in his mouth. With nothing else to be said, Haku leaned over and began to work. Chapter 9: When Doormats Attack. "You're all going to die," said Inari the next morning. The ninja at the table stopped to stare at the little boy calmly declaring their death. All but one were surprised at his audacity. But Sakura was angry. "What was that?" said Sakura, standing up from her place at the table with a sneer on her face. "You all are going to fight, and Gato is going to win, and you'll all dash." Inari dropped to the ground, cradling his head and staring at the shoes of the pink-haired Kunoichi towering over him. "What shit?" she said, crouching down until their faces were almost touching. "Are you talking? Never mind that you're saying this to people fighting for you, or your own grandfather who is fighting for your future. Never mind you said it to one of the greatest minds of the ninja world, or the last heir to a great clan, or a ninja with enough power that even the smallest fraction of it could crush you." She ignored the annoyed grunt behind her from her more surly teammate. She made a fist and raised it up. "You said it to me. And you of all people will not tell me I will lose." Her fist fell, and stopped only because Kakashi was suddenly there beside her, his hand pressed into her elbow, holding her back. Even as he did so, it took a small fraction of a second for her fist to stop, and she felt him slowly increase his own effort until it did. Even he underestimates me, underestimates my strength, she thought, turning to glare at her sensei. Kakashi met her eyes with his own, then shook his head a tiny fraction. His one eye turned slightly towards the child where he had fallen out of his chair in surprise, then back to her. Not sure what he was getting at, she also looked at the civilian kid. And the thought struck her, I just tried to strike a child. She looked down at the kid, crying and covering his head, and she realized just how young he was compared to them. An untrained child, and I tried to hit him as hard as I hit Naruto. Like I would a foe. The horror was slowly growing, a cold chunk of ice in her gut spreading throughout her body. She could feel the cold stares of every person in the room. Her hands unclenched and she turned to leave, only to feel a slight tug from her arm, still in Kakashi's grip. She looked up at him and watched his one eye stare at her, his eyebrow going up slightly, then his gaze turned back to Inari, who was starting to manage his tears. She turned back and bowed to Inari, a deep bow, which she held for some time. I am sorry, Inari-san, for striking you. It is not right to refute words with blows, regardless how one feels. Please forgive me. She rose and, with a nod from Kakashi, retired to her room. Inari, said Naruto, walking over and putting a friendly arm around the kid's shoulders. Maybe we should go for a walk. He led the still stunned kid in the direction of the front door, and as he opened it, he shot a glare at Sasuke, who was still sitting unmoved where he had been all this time. He pointed up the stairs after Sakura, and glared until Sasuke gave a sigh and began to stand. He then led the little boy outside and shut the door. Sasuke knocked on the door and waited. After a few moments of silence, he knocked again. Go away, Naruto, Sakura said through the wall, her voice shaking slightly. I don't want to talk. Sasuke stood there for some time, debating what he was going to do. He had no desire to talk to Sakura. She had been an annoying fangirl for most of his life, one of the loudest, shrillest, and most aggressive of them all, rivaled only by the damned blonde she always competed with. Her desperate calls for his attention had been a major part of his time at school, and it had taken years to learn to ignore it. Had been, he thought to himself, taking note of his internal tirade. She had been annoying, but he begrudgingly admitted that she was getting better, much better. When they sparred, he had to work just as hard to win against her as he did against Naruto, but where Naruto was a challenge because of his innovation and clones, Sakura was a challenge on skill and ferocity alone. She had yet to use any sort of jutsu in their fights, even when permitted, and while she still lost when they were one-on-one, the gap was getting smaller with each day. Their power is my power. He found enough respect in himself, and in her, to knock once more, and managed to grunt out. It's me. No screaming was heard through the walls, no gasps of romantic delight, not even the smallest of cheers greeted him. He heard Sakura quietly pad over to the door and open it with almost no sound, and she stood before him, eyes brimming with tears, biting her lips so hard he could see the marks it was leaving. He stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. He slowly walked to the window, took his time looking out at Naruto and Inari on the dock below, and when he turned back to her, she was in control, calmer than he could really expect from her. What happened? He said, in the same tone he always used, and went slightly with the frost in his own voice. She walked into the middle of the room and sat, head down, his shadow blocking the sun from her face, leaving it in darkness. Her mouth worked, and he heard the slightest of whispers come from her, but nothing understandable. He waited, but she did not repeat herself. He sighed, then stepped away from the window and sat down in front of her, trying to meet her eyes through her bangs. Still, she said nothing. I dedicate my soul to any deity who will answer my one greatest wish, that this will not make her revert to type. He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, raising it up until she met his eyes. He stared at her, motionless, his expression as cold as it ever was, feeling the dampness on her skin under her eyes, and waited. Eventually, her eyes hardened, and she lifted her head from his hand and gave him a nod. Miracles do exist, he thought, and permitted himself a small smile at this most pleasant surprise. What happened? He repeated, trying to keep that small smile, to let a little of its unfamiliar warmth into his voice. I snapped, she said, her tone of voice as dull as his own habitually was, and hearing it from her, he felt a twinge of regret at using it exclusively with others. It makes her sound dead, he thought, so I wonder what it does for me. Why? He asked. She frowned at him. I don't wish to say. You will think less of me than usual, and I think it will annoy you greatly. Sasuke smirked at that. I abandoned my meal and came up here to talk. You can presume I am annoyed. Don't let it stop you, it never really did before. There was a flash in her eyes at that, a streak of anger, and Sasuke was careful not to smile. Let her be angry, it's better than being dead. She took a deep breath and let it out before speaking. I became angry at being considered a failure. Again. I was a failure when we left the academy, grades aside. I knew plenty about shinobi, but nothing about being one. Kakashi showed me that, and I have worked hard to become better. But there is a little part of me that doubts my efforts, that doubts that him, or Naruto, or you will ever see me as anything but weak. She blushed and looked away, and Sasuke felt sudden dread, the cold grasp of a fangirl confession squeezing his heart. I know, she said, looking at him with pain in her eyes, and he wondered if his face had conveyed his dread. I know you dislike what I was. And I know you'll never feel anything for me, you do not need to tell me. But I'm only human. She looked away again. Now all I want is to be strong enough to stand beside you, and Naruto, instead of in your shadows. Sasuke frowned and thought carefully for a moment. He then swept his hand out, palm flat, slapping at her face. With barely a look, her arm raised in a block. Her eyes turned harsh, and she sent her other hand out in return, a slap that he blocked with ease. Then she turned her hands inward, grabbing him by the wrist, and pulled him towards her. He braced himself, leaning away, expecting a dreaded hug or, Kami be damned, a kiss, and was completely unprepared for the headbutt. It was beautiful, a textbook example, the steel of her headband smashing into his nose, his upper lip, rocking his head back. He felt his nose compact, nearly breaking under the strike, and his upper lips were slashed by his own teeth. His body recoiled, and he fell flat on his back. He then gave a short, sharp laugh. After a moment, he heard her snort in return, a perfect imitation of his own manner of amusement. It struck him as odd, but pleasant and somehow deeply amusing. He found himself laughing, not some meager, deliberate, derisive snort, but a full, warm chuckle from deep within his chest, the likes of which he had never felt, even in the old days, before his brother. And even that pain was just a little less sharp. Okay, so Kakashi was right, it hurts less. Like hell, I'll admit it to him. Kakashi told me something, he said from the floor. He lifted his head slightly, and saw her laying on the floor, mirroring his own pose, her hand on her forehead rubbing at the mark the steel head plate had left in her skin. What? She said, sitting up. He dragged himself up into a sitting position as well. He said all three of us have problems. No, really, she said, her voice toneless, her eyes wide in feigned surprise. Ha ha, he said in return. He told me that Naruto has abandonment issues, and with no guidance in his youth, he has self-control problems. Sakura let out a fake gasp, but he ignored her for now. He also said you have self-esteem issues, and having your assumption of capability crushed like it was when we became a team might have made it worse. Sakura grunted at that, but she didn't dispute it. Instead, she tented her hands and stared at him over them. And you? She asked. Sasuke frowned, his good cheer draining away. He had zero desire to talk about what Kakashi had said about the matter to him, but he realized that if he was not honest with her here and now, then all of his efforts would have been fruitless. Better to be discomforted now than have to do this again later. And if Kakashi was right before, about so many things, maybe he was right now. Maybe I am not as alone as I tend to presume. He calls it a chip on my shoulder. I call it my duty. But either way, my brother needs to die for his crimes. It makes me focused, driven, and distant. Sakura did her best, but a small giggle and nod arrived at that declaration. He frowned at her, and made a deliberate and difficult effort not to simply stop talking and walk away. It's not funny, Sakura. I feel pressured. You can't possibly understand. Tell me. He looked at her, sitting in the sunlight streaming from the window. No obsession, no obligation, and no judgment shone in her eyes. She sat quietly as he stared at her, making no effort to push him along, and offering no punishment for declining. He killed my family, he said, unable to meet her eyes any longer. He slaughtered them, and then challenged me to do something about it, to hunt him down and slay him. He used his power against me, made me live it, over and over again. He must die, and I must do it. And every moment I spend not gaining power is a moment wasted, another moment where I allow him to live unpunished. Where my family is unavenged. His eyes dropped, and for a moment, all he could see was his mother and father, again. They sat together in a long and uncomfortable silence. Sakura did not approach him, made no move to comfort him or give him solace. She stared at him, and when he finally lifted his eyes to her face, she was not crying, nor sad, or even angry. She was thinking, entirely focused on her thoughts, Her eyes narrowed and her hands clenched into fists. She looked up, and her eyes were ablaze like a forge, hot coals burning strong enough to turn mere iron into steel. "I will join you in your revenge," she said after a long moment, her voice as quiet as a blade in the darkness. "And I bet when the time comes, so will Naruto. You'll fight your brother, and we'll be there, not to slay him for you, but to support you, to ensure that, come what may, you will have your vengeance. Their strength is my strength." He nodded to her, a moment of understanding passing between them, an epiphany. Sakura was placing success above method, offering her strength unconditionally, possibly sacrificing herself for his goal. There was no schoolgirl romance involved, no declaration of undying love, not even an assumption of friendship, only the determination to do what needed to be done. She understood exactly what it was to be an avenger. "Sakura," he said, giving her a small smile, "I accept your offer. Not out of friendship, or kinship, or any other reason, but in acknowledgement. You may not be as strong as you can be. You may have to work yourself to an early grave to keep up. But you are strong, and between the two of us, we'll demolish anyone who says otherwise." Her smirked. "Think of everything else before then as practice." He held out his arm, fist clenched tight. After a moment, she did the same. Naruto and Inari sat at the dock, their shoes off and their feet soaking in the water. Inari was slumped forward, hat pulled low over his eyes as he stared at the water. "Sorry, Inari," said Naruto, kicking his heels slightly. "Sakura-chan can be scary." After some more silence, Naruto sighed and mirrored the kid's slump. "Why do you think we are going to die?" "Because everyone who fights dies. Shopkeepers die. Bridge workers die." His voice became quiet, but just on the edge of his hearing, Naruto heard Inari whisper the final person on his list, and the most important. "My dad died." Naruto sat there quietly and tried to think. He was not well suited to this conversation, and he knew it. It was not, after all, a subject he had any real right to comment on. In the end, he defaulted to blunt honesty, which at least had the benefit of being uncomplicated. "I never knew my dad," he said with a shrug. "My mom either. I was brought up alone for the most part. Maybe that's the difference. You know, between us. Or maybe it's the sameness between us. I never knew my parents, and hurt for my lack. You knew your dad, and hurt for your loss. Either way, we both hurt. So why fight?" came the quiet reply. Naruto leaned back, resting his head on his folded arms, and stared at the bright blue sky. "Well," he said, trying to put his thoughts in order, "I don't know. Is not fighting any better? You might be safe, but then again, you might not be. Nothing is stopping this Gato bastard from just walking up here and killing you, with or without the bridge. It might be we're all going to die. It happens. If you are going to die." He raised his hand, clasping at the distant sun as if to make it his own, closing his fist around it. "If you're going to die anyhow, maybe it's better to go out fighting. Who knows?" he said, smiling to himself. "You might just save someone else. You cannot protect anyone if you never raise your arms to help them." Inari leaned back and looked at the sky. His face was no longer sad, but thoughtful. Chapter 10: Training in What You Really Need. Kakashi looked up from his bowl of unfamiliar compressed grain bits, and looked at his team, taking stock of the end result from Sakura's little temper tantrum the other day. Inari was being very quiet but a little more polite than previously, and occasionally talking to Naruto. The orange blur of Konoha was his usual self, loud and playful in spite of the long hours he had spent with Kakashi the night before, retelling the battle in full detail. Kakashi could see how the boy kept turning slightly towards the door, and he took it as a sign of unrest. Sakura was quietly eating her meal, and spending a great deal of effort being as quiet and polite as possible, to the point of feeling distant from the others. And every few minutes she would glance once at Kakashi, a tiny flick of her eyes, like she was waiting for his permission, or punishment. Smart girl, he thought, taking a bite of what had been introduced to him as Wait Fleeks, by Tsunami and listening to them crunch as he watched Sasuke, who had yet to say a word to anyone. He was distant and quiet, and held himself apart from the others in his body language, same as always, but he looked comfortable, as much as Kakashi had ever seen him, and even as he watched, Sasuke shifted, just slightly, towards Sakura. They're a little young for that, he thought with a little internal giggle, but something must have happened between them. Well, good, they'll all need a good mood for today. Kakashi set his spoon down next to the empty bowl, ignoring the strange look he was getting from Tsunami, who had been watching him the entire meal, fixated no doubt on his unremoved mask, and stood. "Tazuna," he said to the old man, who spared him a glance. "Today, I will guard you myself, while my students train." "What?" shouted Naruto, slamming his hand on the table. But that Machi guy and his friend could attack any time. Kakashi shook his head at the outburst. No, they will not. Zabuza has been tricked, in a very obvious and, according to you, very painful manner. He will need time to heal, assuming he has no medic Nin with him, which is probable. Furthermore, he will need time to plan his assault, because now he knows that we are capable of using shadow clones as substitutes for anyone. And if he has half a brain, he added mentally, he knows we have at least one chakra powerhouse with us. Splitting his original clone into multiple clones had been a good move for Naruto to make, but it also gave away some of his strengths, and a smart opponent might spot this. Kakashi knew what it was to be underestimated, and he refused to make that fatal error against his foe. I will be giving each of you a task, and it will be upon you to train with it as hard as you can. You will do so in the area I bring you to, and will train until either I retrieve you, night falls, or you hear a disturbance that needs to be investigated or reported. He looked at each of them in turn, focusing on them and letting out a tiny fraction of his killing intent. Your first priority, at all times, is this house and its occupants. Someone like Gato or Zabuza would not be above taking hostages or murdering families to win, and I will not have my team failing this mission to such a blatantly obvious concept. Each genin nodded in turn, and he grunted. Sasuke, come with me. They stood on the dock outside, facing the water. I dislike leaving you to practice anything in easy view, Kakashi said quietly. As it gives away your strengths, so be aware of your surroundings, just in case. Sasuke grunted in annoyance, and Kakashi admitted to himself that it was an obvious point to make. He acknowledged the point with a shrug, and got a nod in return. Activate your Sharingan. Sasuke opened his eyes slightly wider, and Kakashi watched them turn red, 2 tomos circling in one eye, and a third in the other. Not a complete set just yet, but it'll do for this. I will use a jutsu you are familiar with, the Great Fireball, which I understand you can perform. I want you to observe it carefully, especially the chakra that is expelled with it. Sasuke grunted again, and Kakashi performed the hand seals and exhaled a billowing cloud of fire that flashed into the lake, boiling the water beneath it. When the technique ended, Kakashi watched as several fish floated to the surface. What did you see? He asked. Sasuke let his eyes rest and thought of how to answer. The obvious answer, a cloud of fire sustained by chakra, was too obvious to require demonstration. Kakashi obviously wanted him to notice something, but what? Because he asked for my Sharingan, he probably wanted me to focus on the chakra. There is a reason he did so. The amount of chakra is a measure of power, but not something I can improve quickly. The source of chakra is from the mouth, which did not need demonstration. Again please, sensei. Sasuke watched, tomo spinning, as Kakashi performed the move again. The fire flowed from his sensei's masked face almost like a liquid, rolling out in a ball shape that whirled with its own internal flow. The cloud expanded over the same patch of water, leaving the water sizzling and the already dead fish burnt that much more. Then he focused on the fish, and saw what he was looking for. It's a cloud, and like a cloud, it touches a large area, but not evenly. The fish in the middle were burnt, and the ones outside were much less burnt. And what was I shooting at? Sasuke looked again. You were aiming for the fish, he hazarded. Kakashi nodded, and waved a hand at the water. How effective was this technique? Sasuke snorted in amusement. Not very, he said. Kakashi hit more water than fish, and all that effort was wasted. Then his eyes narrowed. If this was an ineffective tool for catching fish, how effective would it be against a ninja? He looked at Kakashi, who was waiting patiently for him to make the connection. Konoha teaches those who have an affinity for fire in many techniques, and every one of them can essentially be considered the Grand Fireball, only more so jutsu. It is ludicrous. Sometimes you need a net, and other times you need a spear. Sasuke stared into the distance, thinking. How do I do that? He asked himself, unaware he did so out loud. Your training is to figure it out. Kakashi was already walking back towards the house. Gather the fish you kill, no point wasting food. Oh, and Sasuke? He turned and Sasuke swore he could see the man beaming through his mask. This is a reward. I don't know what you said, but you managed to get through to your teammate. In doing so, you make them stronger. In doing so, I make myself stronger, Sasuke said, slightly annoyed that Kakashi was still pounding it into his head, and even more annoyed the gray-haired bastard was so damned right. He grunted out his annoyance and turned back to the lake, mind already dedicated to the task ahead. So, what am I learning, sensei? Naruto was fairly bouncing as he walked along with Kakashi into the woods. Kakashi was scanning the trees looking something, and when he found it, he jumped ahead. Naruto ran to catch up, and found Kakashi standing in a field, a long branch over his shoulder. He tossed the branch to Naruto, who stepped aside and let it fall to the ground. Kakashi smirked under his mask at the fine and quite shinobi-like degree of caution. "Pick up the stick," he said, taking a ready stance, "and hit me with it." Naruto looked suitably nervous, but he bent down and hefted the stick, which was almost twice his height. "I don't know if I can hit you." "Not as an oh no, not my sensei, more I doubt this will work, Kakashi-sensei." "Fair enough, Naruto, but try as best you can." Naruto charged, stick held at one end, arms wide to support the weight, and before he even got within range he began bringing the stick across in a sweeping arc, starting the blow early so it had time to be in place when he got close enough. Kakashi jumped straight up, just high enough to pass over the stick, and as he came down, he was pleasantly unsurprised to see Naruto's leg lashing out into a kick even as he continued his turn to bring the stick back into play, exactly as he had described the previous night. On the next pass, Kakashi caught the stick with a grunt, stopping Naruto dead in his tracks. "Naruto, have you ever fought someone who used the oversized stick as a weapon?" Naruto made a confused face and shook his head. "How about someone else, who used a different oversized weapon?" Kakashi expected the boy to remain confused, and he was not disappointed. He waited a moment, and tried once more. "Like, say, Zabuza?" "Huh!" Kakashi sighed and ran a hand over his face. A tree does not grow overnight, he told himself, fighting the urge to raise his voice. "Naruto, you fought just then exactly like you described Zabuza to fight. I think you managed to pick up the basics of his style when you fought him." "But I only fought him once," Naruto shouted in confusion. "No. By my understanding, you fought him nearly 120 times, one clone at a time." Naruto brightened. "Like how I started to get how Hinata-chan's moves worked once we started sparring." Kakashi nodded, but his quiet acknowledgement was ignored by the loudly celebrating genin. "Yeah!" he shouted, spinning in place. "I know how to sword fight now." "Not in the least, Naruto." Naruto tripped over himself, and planted his face into the ground. "You do not know how to fight with a sword, Naruto. You can do a convincing job faking it, but it's only an act, and a real swordsman would spot it in an instant and gut you like a fish." He reached down and helped Naruto up, noticing the frown on the boy's face. "But that does not mean it is useless." He handed Naruto the stick. "I want you to use your clones and try to figure out some ways to counter the sword Zabuza uses, which we will then discuss with the team each night to see if any of them are viable. In doing so, you will develop your taijutsu to some degree, practice developing strategy and tactics, and more importantly, you may give us a major advantage in the fight we'll face quite soon." Naruto saluted, stick still in hand, and Kakashi was forced to duck under the swing. He then stood, and his face grew dark. "Meanwhile, I will need some more clones from you for a separate purpose." He sighed inwardly as he waited for Naruto to produce his copies. This is going to be rough all around. Sakura looked around at the trees surrounding her, her heart filled with icy dread once more. The area Kakashi had led her to was gloomy and dark, filled with briars and dead leaves underfoot, an untamed and unpleasant deep forest. She followed him closely, nerves taut. This will be punishment, she thought as she stepped around a tree, it will be. A ninja cannot lose control. To lose control is to fail the mission. To lose control is to die. To lose control is to kill your allies in error. Her mind continued to whirl, dark thoughts flitting in and out of her head even as she stepped around the worst of the detritus on the ground. Kakashi stopped and turned suddenly, and she felt the ice in her chest spread. He was looking down at her, and not just literally. His eyes were cold and distant, all the worse because she knew the warmth they usually held. She offered a short bow, and continued to hang her head as she rose from it. "I did something wrong, sensei, and I know it to be wrong. I will be punished, and it will be just, because I know you will make no decision or punishment I do not deserve. I am ready." Kakashi sighed inwardly, his eye narrowing at her. A good act, a properly demure Yamato Nadeshiko, which means nothing for a ninja. Even the lowest monster can show contrition afterwards. "Sakura," he said quietly, stiffly, "you know already what you did was wrong, and pretty words cannot change anything. You are as much of a danger to your friends and your clients as to yourself, and no words can change that either. I cannot let you endanger the team." He stood slightly taller, his head rising, as he pronounced his judgment. "I brought you out here to spare your dignity, not to train you. I am forced to remove you from Team 7. For the rest of this mission, you will remain at the house, not as a guard, but as a civilian. When the mission is over, you will return with us to Konoha, as a civilian, there to determine if you wish to enter the academy again." Kakashi walked over to her, reached up, and pulled off her forehead protector, the very thing that told the world what she was, what she had been. "You are dismissed, civilian!" Sakura's head whipped up, eyes wide, and she stared at her former teacher. But his gaze, his voice, his will did not waver, and she let the tears form and fall from her eyes without a word of dissent. No gasp, no shout, no wail. She suffered silently, and he nodded once, both in dismissal and in recognition of her composure, her last act as a shinobi. She turned and walked away quietly, refusing to make a single sound save for the tap of her feet and her tears on the forest floor. And just as she reached the point where she would be hidden from view, where it would be acceptable to let out her suffering, she heard him, quietly, so quietly she wondered if she should have heard him at all. "Jumped up, fangirl!" She whirled into a crouch and lunged, her voice returning in a guttural scream, hand curled into ineffective claws, indignity and hated and red rage filling her mind and body, screaming for the blood of her tormentor. Her hand came around in an arc, nails out, knowing she could never kill him but desperately swearing she would scar him at the least. He caught her hand without effort. His other arm shot out, grabbing her by the hair and tearing out several strands as he jerked her forward, until she came to a stop, forehead thumping solidly on the metal plate of the protector over his own forehead, her right eye to his left, the whirling red pinwheel spinning, engulfing her vision. "What is the lesson you need, Sakura?" he asked, with the same cool tone. She panted, dangling in his arms. She wanted to bring her knee up and crush his stomach, his family jewels, his throat. She wanted to bring her other hand into play, to slash at his face, to rip that damned mask off, to rip out his throat with her bare hands. She wanted to pull a kunai out of her bag, stab his hand, his arm, for daring to stop the justice of her attack, to plunge it into his chest, his gut. She wanted control. She breathed, barely pushing it out through her throat, tight as it was in her fury. Her face blazed red in shame, her jaws ached from how hard she was clenching her teeth, but at the very least, there were no more tears. He dropped her and stepped away, and to her credit, she did not stand. Far from it, she pulled her legs under herself and sat properly, nettles digging into her shins and knees. It took her nearly a minute to still her breathing, and when she unclenched her fists, her nails came away with blood underneath them from her palms. Kakashi sat across from her, nettles digging into his shins and knees, hands open and resting on his knees. "Sakura," he said, his tone now carrying a touch of his old warmth. "Before we begin, there is one thing to understand. You have not been removed from the team. As you may have guessed by now, that whole thing was a test, and yes, it went very poorly for you." She shuddered at his words, tears flowing freely, residual anger and shame warring for her mind. "You are no victim, Sakura. You cannot ever claim that these outbursts are uncontrollable, or acceptable, or necessary for your fighting style. Any of those excuses are garbage. When you get angry, it is your fault. When you lash out at me, it is your fault. When you try to strike a civilian child for speaking back to you, it is, undeniably, your fault." He watched her body shake as the adrenaline left it. He took a deep breath and let it out. "That said, you are also not completely to blame. You have been training with the Inuzuka, who are famously vicious fighters who also famously tend to be loose, if effective, cannons, and who use their emotions as a source of strength, letting their inner animal out to fight. Furthermore, when the team was formed, I did receive files on the medical status of my students. I am fully aware that you are beginning to change." He coughed at this, slightly put off, and was glad to see she did nothing but blush slightly at the comment, rather than the grievous assault he would normally expect. "Control becomes harder. In normal teens, this means bad choices, bad misadventures, and bad stories to tell someday to their own children, because they have the luxury of a world where errors in judgment are not deadly." He rested his hands on her shoulders and gave her what he hoped was a stern yet friendly look, such as the Hokage had often given him. "You are not justified, and you are not to blame, Sakura. I am proud of your efforts to gain strength and become a true shinobi, and the lengths you are going through to get there. But learning how to fight as an Inuzuka is always a struggle between animal instinct and human control, and you've learned far too much and too quickly to adjust readily." "Do I need to stop training with them?" she asked, eyes shut, disappointed but accepting. "No." She breathed a sigh of relief. "Thankfully, you're not inherently violent or uncontrolled. This is not a biological problem, or an upbringing problem. It is a learned trait, and what you learn, you can unlearn, mostly through practice. Naruto, please come out." The clones came out of the surrounding trees, 10 in all, tentatively, as if they wanted nothing to do with this. "I told them, not the original, what was going to happen," thought Kakashi as Sakura looked around. That way, he could not give himself orders to the contrary. Just in case. Sakura, your training for the day is simple. Do not kill any clones. He stood, hands on hips, looking down at her again. That is your only goal, and it will be hard, because these clones are ordered to do their best to infuriate you through any means necessary just short of permanent injury, on pain of having the original removed from the team for disobeying a direct order. After a moment's pause, held a hand out to her. She took it, arms shaking, and he helped her stagger to her feet. Make no mistake, this is a serious task before you, he said lightly, smiling behind his mask. I've seen you two interacting before. Sakura let out a small laugh, shaky as a leaf in the wind, but a laugh nonetheless. Yes, sensei, she whispered. He held out his hand, and she took back her forehead protector, staring at it briefly before tying it back into place. She looked up at the clones surrounding her and nodded, a little of her old fire entering her eyes. I am ready, she said, even as Kakashi vanished from the clearing. Sasuke looked like hell when he walked into the house that night. His face was red and peeling in places, like a terrible sunburn. His lips were cracked and bleeding slightly, and his hair was slightly singed in a few places, giving him a cologne of burned human hair that dominated his surroundings. He turned to Naruto and grinned just slightly to see the blonde looking as bad as he felt. Naruto was covered in bruises in spite of his unusually strong healing ability, and he was holding one of his arms oddly, clenching it tightly to his chest. Sasuke suspected it had been dislocated at one point. You look like shit, dope. Naruto grinned back. You look and smell like it, team, so I'd be quiet, or Sakura's gonna. His voice dropped out as he saw the front door open, and Sakura walk into the room, followed by 10 clones. Naruto and Sasuke shared a look, and the look said, we had a good day. Sakura looked awful, just awful. She was covered head to toe in mud and filth, nettles and thorns. There were many, many places where she was bleeding from those thorns. Her hair had gone from an untamed mane of pink to an ungodly towering tangle of pond scum and sticks, leaves and all. But the worst was her eyes. Her eyes looked like she had been crying all day, red and puffy and painfully sallow at the same time. She looked around the room with her emerald eyes glittering. They lingered on Sasuke for a moment, then on Naruto. She turned to the clones, who were shuffling behind her, eyes down. Dispel, please, one at a time, she said, turning back to the real Naruto, looking him in the eye. One by one, they dispelled. Naruto examined their memories. That one had called her forehead, like he had seen Ino do. That one had asked her on a date, once per minute, for the entire time. That one had deliberately wound nettles and sticks into her hair. That one had picked her up and bodily dunked her in a pond. That one had snapped her bra against her back whenever she had turned away from him. I'm dead. Naruto's face flamed as he received the memories of the clones, and the terrible things they had done to her. It was like a best of reel of the things Sakura hated him for, and things he would never do to any girl, never mind one with a love of violence. The kind of reel they play at a funeral, he thought. Per Naruto, he had a good life, cut tragically short. Eventually, all the clones were finished. Sakura started walking forward, one ominous step at a time. Naruto was rooted in place, terrified, and even Sasuke stepped aside as she passed near him. She reached out her arms, her scratched, filthy arms, and draped them around Naruto's neck. She pulled him into a hug. Naruto stared over her shoulder at Sasuke, mouthing silently at his other teammate, "What do I do?" Sasuke shrugged in return, hands and arms out, just as confused. "I'm sorry, Naruto," she said quietly, hugging a little tighter. Naruto raised his arms and gave her a small pat, high on the back, his other hand hovering, unsure what to do in the madness that had become his world. "I'm sorry I hit you all the time," she said. "Sorry I was so mean to you, sorry I deserved that, so sorry." Some laws of the universe are unbending, and the law of narrative causality is one of them. Thus it was that Kakashi chose that moment to walk in the door, to find Sakura clinging to Naruto, covered in filth, and with no clones in sight. Tazuna was with him, and with all the tact of an old man in love with trouble loudly shouted out, "Wow, so they're a couple now!" Naruto flinched. Sasuke flinched. Kakashi flinched. Sakura let out a snore, out like a light. And all was right with the world. "Promise, Kakashi-sensei," she told the clones to release right there in front of me. All 10 were there. Kakashi looked at Sakura, who, after some difficulty and more than one amusing moment watching Naruto try to find a safe place to put his hand to support her weight, was now in bed, still covered in filth and leaves. She looked tired, drawn out, but she was also smiling in her sleep. "And she didn't attack them, in any of your memories?" Naruto shook his head. "She yelled a lot at first. Especially when I His mind froze in reflexive terror, refusing to permit himself to speak of the dreadful snap of elastic. Kakashi raised a worldly eyebrow to new heights, and Naruto backed up, arms crossed. No way. Don't even tell me what you're thinking, because whatever it is, so much nope. He turned away from the dreadful eyebrow. Anyway, she spent most of the day crying, really. I think that was right after one of my clones pointed out that she earned it. Kakashi sighed. You never indicated what you meant when you said that, did you? Huh. She thinks you did it because of how she treated you in the past, not because of Inari. Naruto looked down at her sleeping form, at her wrecked hair and ruined cloths and red-rimmed eyes. Not even if she did earn it, he said quietly to himself, and Kakashi nodded, satisfied. I'll clear that up with her in the morning, said the Jonin, waving Naruto out of the room. When they had both stepped out, Kakashi closing the door silently behind them. We'd best let her sleep, he said quietly, leading his genin down the hall. Now that we have that sorted, we need to talk about your clones. Chapter 11, How to Find Your Real Opponent. Kakashi watched the mist with mild indifference. It had started first thing in the morning on the second day, and a quick check with his Sharingan had shown it to be laced with chakra. He'd spent nearly an hour watching the mist, waiting for a threat to appear, and then had a quiet laugh about it, and relaxed. There are two ways to deal with threats, as a predator and as prey. Predators were focused, constantly scanning their surroundings for danger and opportunity. Most shinobi were predators, and when pushed, would spend more effort on paranoia and desperate searching than it was worth. A common technique to use against a shinobi on guard duty was to give them an overt but confusing threat and let them tire themselves out trying to figure out what was happening. Kakashi understood how to be prey as well as predator. Prey animals, he observed, did not become more focused when threatened, they became less focused. Instead of moving their vision from point to point, searching for the danger, they let their perception loosen, trusting their senses to warn them when something changed in the new and dangerous environment they were in. Meanwhile, they went about their duties, keeping fit and keeping rested, ready to act in a moment. The mist was not nearly strong enough to block his regular vision, and certainly not strong enough to conceal a trap, save for the inherent trap of tiring himself out staring at it with his Sharingan, burning chakra uselessly. In the end, Kakashi stayed close to Tazuna while the man worked, calmly keeping his one eye focused on his book. Tazuna and his workers noticed Kakashi's lack of concern, and while a few started to get jittery, most of them continued their duties undisturbed. Now appearing for the fourth day in a row, the mist had returned. And as he had every day, Kakashi gave it his full attention for a while, because while one common tactic against shinobi was exhaustion, another was complacency, and he preferred to not die a death that would have Guy mocking him at his funeral, thank you kindly. After a few minutes without any sort of threat appearing, Kakashi pulled out his book again. In the forest, Naruto had collapsed. On the first night after Sakura's punishment, Naruto had demonstrated what he had come up with, and was pleased when Kakashi had approved several tactics that, while basic, might be effective in an emergency. He had sent Naruto back out, stick in hand, and told him to use his clones to practice fighting with the false blade. This is a good chance to see if you have talent in that direction, he had commented with a smile. And you might come up with a few more tactics. Naruto had in fact come up with more tactics, and each night he and his team discussed them, as assigned. Unfortunately, his restless nature had gotten the better of him finally, after days of observing, and he'd engaged his clones in a spar. He'd won, but the last one had landed a solid blow to his head that made his ears ring, so he lay on the grass, staring at the sky and waiting for his healing to kick in. Damn if this thing isn't useful, he thought to himself, raising his hand to stare at the sunlight streaming through his fingers. I may not like it, I may not want it, but it is helpful for training. Thanks, QB. There was a brief moment where he felt something stir in the back of his mind, like a whisper without words or meaning, but it faded as his ears caught the sound of feet shifting, ever so slightly, on the grass behind the trees. He closed his eyes and let his hand drop, stilling his breathing. He heard more rustling, felt the earth shift slightly as the steps approached, and still he remained motionless, refusing to tense up as they came to him. The stranger paused for some time, leaning over him, then knelt by his side. You may as well get up, said a soft, feminine voice. You're no good at pretending to sleep. Naruto opened his eyes and looked up at the lovely young woman who was kneeling next to him, unblemished skin and smooth, silky hair shining in the sunlight. Who are you? He asked, still lying on the grass. And how would you know? I've worked as a nurse, she said with a smile. I see a lot of people pretend to sleep, especially around time for medication. Naruto smiled back, watching the eyes of the woman across from him, then darting his gaze slightly to one side to signal one of his clones, hidden in plain sight by posing as his backpack. The clone released quietly to feed him some interesting memories. You may as well give it up, Naruto parroted, sitting up with a smirk. I saw you with your hands over my throat, and you were hardly this friendly when you approached. You're a shinobi too, aren't you? The lady froze, uncertain, then looked at his empty hands. She smiled sweetly, a genuine smile, and said, Sometimes, yes. But today, I am just a nurse, picking herbs for a friend to help them heal. She stood and held out a hand to the younger ninja. Would a truce be okay, just for now? I'd like to know a little about you, the ninja who lets an opponent approach without fear or fury. Naruto smiled and took her hand with a small blush. Why are you a shinobi, Naruto? Naruto blinked, surprised at the question. They had been picking herbs quietly for a while, one herb at a time, because while it drove him mad not to use his clones to speed things up, he was mindful of Kakashi's warnings about giving away his strengths. This was the first thing she had said to him after the truce. I want to be acknowledged. Where I grew up, I was an outcast. Everyone but the Hokage seemed to hate me. He made a fist in one hand. I cried, and nothing changed. He made a fist in the other hand. I played pranks, and nothing changed. He looked at his hands, clenching hard enough to go white. He took a deep breath, and released them. Then, I became a ninja, and things changed. My sensei acknowledges me, even though he says I have a long way to go. So does my old teacher. He smiled and laughed at the memory of all the lectures he suffered through, remembering the small smile he always got from Irika afterwards. Even my teammates respect me some. If I earn my goal, my respect, by being a good ninja, I guess there is nothing else to do but become Hokage, so they all will acknowledge me in the end. The girl giggled, causing Naruto to blush brightly. What's so funny? He grunted. Nothing, she said, her laugh carried all the way up to her eyes. You're just so earnest. So outgoing. I can appreciate that. Naruto shrugged and picked another plant. So, he said casually, what about you? The silence was complete. He looked up to see the woman staring at him, frowning. He shrugged and plucked another plant. You don't have to say, he said quietly. I was just wondering why you were here, on the other side of me and my team, when you seem like a good person. Do you have someone precious to you, Naruto? Naruto nodded. When a person has someone precious to them, that is when they truly become strong. My sensei found me as a child, starving and alone. He took me in spite of the trouble, the inconvenience. I owe him my life, and it is his to spend. He has a dream, like yours, and I will follow that dream, even to the death. She stood, basket in hand, and gave Naruto a short bow. I'll not ask you to quit. I would never ask you to give up on your dreams. But forgive me, when the time comes, if I am forced to harm you. Naruto jumped up and laughed. I forgive you already, even if I'll totally win, lady. Good, she said, some of her cheer coming back as she turned and started walking away. I hope your future is bright. I hope you get strong. She let out a giggle and looked over her shoulder. Oh, and Naruto? Eh? I'm a boy. Wait, what? Sasuke looked up from the water, staring into the forest, where he heard Naruto shouting. But the shout was not one of alarm, so he scoffed and turned back to his practice, and the 3 fish he had managed to tag so far, one at a time. Sakura never even heard the shout, lost as it was to the sound of splintering wood under her feet. That night, Naruto retold the story to his companions. So, is this where it really starts, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura was covered in bruises and cuts, and her hair was a patchwork of nettle and thorns and sticks, as it had been every night since her punishment. She cleaned it each night, and each day she returned to the dark depths of the woods for her practice. I think so, he replied. No. The entire table turned to Sasuke, who was sitting with his arms on the table, fingers tented in front of his mouth. The effect was somewhat ruined by the medicated rag he held to his lips, but nobody present begrudged him that small comfort after seeing the burns. You have an idea, Kakashi said. He had a few of his own, but this was, ultimately, a training opportunity for his cute little genin, so he wanted to hear them out first. Sasuke glanced at Naruto. Dobe, you said the other shinobi seemed pleasant enough, even when he admitted to being our foe? When Naruto nodded, Sasuke continued. Shinobi are not cheap. We already know who wants Tazuna dead. We already know the person in question is a scumbag. We already know that dead people don't generally pay the bills. Hired shinobi who do not suffer from bloodthirst will not fight for free. The solution to our problem is to cut out the proverbial middleman. Isn't that a little? Sakura paused, and thought for a few more moments. She blushed slightly when she realized she was about to protest on moral grounds about killing one man to avoid killing another. That was not an argument any shinobi had the right to make. I mean, won't we get into trouble if we kill such a politically powerful opponent? Sasuke shook his head and leaned back in his chair. Who's gonna care? If we kill indiscriminately, people get upset, but who is really going to make a fuss about him? He crossed his arms and glared at nothing. He lived by the sword. Let him die by the sword. Kakashi did not move a muscle on his face, even as he cheered for his student on the inside. There is one problem. Everyone looked to him. We have no contract. Shinobi are not cheap. Inari's chair thumped against the floor as the boy rushed away from the table. Kakashi was worried at first that he'd dropped the hint a little too hard, until the boy ran back, set his chair upright, climbed on it, and held up a small ceramic pig. With much ceremony, he spiked it onto the table, smashing it to shards and revealing a child's fortune in 1 real coins. How much does it cost to hire a shinobi to kill Gato? He asked triumphantly. Kakashi shook his head and smiled. That's 1 fish hooked. Let's see who else bites the bait. I'm sorry, Inari, but I am a jonin, an elite. I have standards to keep. I'm a genin and fuck standards, Sakura said with a growl. She reached out and dragged 2 of the coins from the pile. I'll take 2 real, and that's twice the man's worth, as you're obviously so rich, Inari-san. She turned to Kakashi, holding up her fee. Kakashi-sensei, I do not know how to write a legal contract properly, and as the nearest shinobi of authority, I defer to you for accepting contracts on behalf of Konohagakure. Will you help? I offer you half my bounty in return. He had not expected this. Sasuke, sure, and maybe even Naruto would be willing to kill one bad person to save a town, but he never expected her to take this quite so seriously, aggression problems or no. He cleared his throat and leaned forward. You're taking this in a very flippant manner, Sakura. His voice held no humor, and his one visible eye bored into her like a drill. You know what you're agreeing to do, right? Among other things, I doubt our foes will believe you unless you bring a souvenir. That's messy work. Sakura nodded and looked down at the coins in her hand. You said it yourself before we left. It's something I'll have to do eventually. May as well start here, where there is no doubt it's the right thing to do. Kakashi looked at the other 2 shinobi in the room and arched an eyebrow. Sasuke shrugged. Even if we beat the other shinobi, Gato will just hire more once we leave. If we really want to solve the problem, we need to take it out at the source. I'd help, but I am guessing you'll want us to be on guard until she succeeds, and fewer people means less risk during infiltration. Kakashi nodded, feeling a little warm pride on the careful reasoning, then looked at his last student. Naruto was frowning this entire time, and when Kakashi looked at him, he pouted. I don't like it. Sakura-chan is going to kill Gato in cold blood, and everyone is okay with that? Kakashi sighed. What do you propose instead, Naruto? We go beat him up until he apologizes. The entire room face-bombed in exasperation. Sasuke and Sakura shared a look, and it was Sasuke who spoke first. I doubt that would work, Dobe. Gato uses violence, murder, and intimidation in his efforts to control the populace. Even if he backed down now, he would only come back later with even more men and shinobi to do the same thing. But do we have to kill him? Asked Naruto, still upset. Naruto, said Sakura quietly. When you throw a kunai at someone, what do you expect to happen if you hit? Or when you set off an explosive tag? Or even when you punch them? All these things can kill, that's their very purpose. We're trained to kill. Someday, we all will take a life, even if we try our best to avoid it. If I have to start somewhere, I want it to be someone who is unarguably evil. If someone has to die, let it be those who deserve it, not some tool paid for in blood money. Naruto gave a small grunt and folded his arms into a pillow for his head. You may be right, Sakura-chan. He grunted from the folds of his jacket. But that doesn't mean I have to like it, or go along with it willingly. If I kill someone, how can I be friends with them later? Kakashi reached over and laid a hand on his shoulder, causing the genin to look up into his sensei's smile. Believe it or not, Naruto, what you have said is what makes a good shinobi in the end. Our kind have a reputation as monsters, thanks to some who kill for pleasure, or do so indiscriminately. They become fearful beings, but at the cost of their own humanity. I'd rather that not happen to any of you. Sometimes you will have to kill, but I don't begrudge you for avoiding it when you can, as long as you do so when you must. Naruto smiled, and gave Kakashi a small nod. Good, said Kakashi, withdrawing his hand and reaching into his vest. Because I have some plans on how to prepare for Zabuza, should he attack before Sakura returns. Chapter 12, Ninja Diplomacy. Sakura managed to make it to Gato's office before she encountered any problems. Gato's security was built around defending against mobs of civilians, not against a lone competent shinobi, especially one small enough to fit into tight spaces and athletic enough to get to the hard-to-reach areas. The security at night was that much worse, because Gato did not have any sort of official security system or patrols, which meant that most of his men simply congregated into a single room on the bottom floor to play cards. The door guards fell for the simplest distraction, a rock thrown outside their field of view. Instead of sending one member out, or calling the disturbance in to be checked by another, both guards had simply wandered casually into the darkness. She had considered taking them out, but Naruto's reluctance, and Kakashi-sensei's acceptance of it, made her leery of killing guards, especially those who held no threat to her. She slipped into the door, they left the door unlocked, and started making her way up, under the probably reasonable assumption that Gato's office would be the highest one. Security inside was remarkably simple as well. A few lone guards patrolled each floor with flashlights, and rather than making methodical sweeps and looking closely at places large enough to hide in, they just walked around in case they noticed something. At one point Sakura had ducked behind a coat rack, certain she would be clearly visible behind the thin obstruction, but the guard had passed not even a foot in front of her and never so much as twitched. Sakura made it to the top floor, opened the door to Gato's office, and found that she was not the only one who noticed the security holes and had decided to use them. A pair of thugs were gathered around a wall safe behind Gato's desk, listening closely as they tried to find the combination to the lock. One was facing the safe, but the other had his ear to it, and when she swung the door open, his eyes began to widen. Her kunai entered his skull hard enough to make a clicking sound when the point tapped the safe door on the other side. His compatriot managed to turn, his arm dropping to his sword, but that only resulted in him catching the second blade with his throat instead of his skull. He released his sword and grabbed at his throat desperately as his life flowed between his fingers, leaving himself open to a third and unarguably final blade to his forehead. Sakura held her breath, listening carefully. After 30 long seconds, with no sounds of alarm or alert, she relaxed, calmly shut the door, walked over to the corner of the room, pulled aside the leaves of an office plant, and puked as quietly as she could into the planter, her entire body trembling. They were thieves, she told herself as she heaved. They were thieves, and a danger to my mission. I could never have trusted them to be silent, and I had no time for anything fancy. She let the tears flow rather than trying to hold them back and risk sobbing, desperately wishing she had brought her bag so she could rinse her mouth with her canteen. Eventually, the adrenaline shakes ended and the crying stopped. She pulled herself together to get her job done. The bodies were moved under the desk, the blood cleaned as best she could, and the window unlatched and quietly teased open. She then crouched in the corner of the office, behind what little cover the potted plant could give her, and waited for daylight. "You got the plan down, Naruto?" Naruto nodded cheerfully. Kakashi was a little worried. The plan for dealing with the enemy shinobi relied a great deal on Naruto, and in things that could not be trained in mere days. Kakashi's plan was to fight his foes with his mind more than his body, and for all his cute little genin's perseverance and strength of character, Naruto was not famed for his intellectual prowess. Still, it's not like I haven't seen him do something very similar back in Konoha. "We'll be fine," said Sasuke from the kitchen table where he sat, his meal untouched. His hands were clenched together on the table, and Kakashi saw those hands tremble slightly before they tightened that much more. Sasuke's smile, however, felt genuine, and his eyes sparkled as he looked at his teacher. "If it comes down to it," he said with a smirk, cracking his still slightly charred lips, "we can always use his clones for cover to escape and come to you for aid." "You gave Naruto the thing?" Sasuke nodded, and Naruto pulled back the collar of his shirt and coat to demonstrate. Kakashi nodded to his students, then waved at Tazuna and took off. Behind him the young shinobi grinned and started to put the plan into motion. Kakashi stood at the edge of the bridge, peering into the mist nervously. Something felt off about the day, and he was full of adrenaline and processed baked grains, a queasy combination. He idly twirled a kunai on his finger and turned to look at Tazuna for the 5th time in the past hour. "Everything going okay?" Tazuna grunted, partially in irritation and partially with effort as he lifted another stone and slid it into place on the edge of the bridge railing. "Yes, the same as it has been, so quick." Kakashi was by the bridge builder's side immediately, sensing something was wrong when the old man went quiet. They both looked out into the still water surrounding them, then down. The water level below the bridge was dropping rapidly, the currents and eddies drawing the water away into the mists. Then they heard the sound of rushing waves. Kakashi didn't wait for the attack to arrive. He grabbed Tazuna roughly, tossing the man onto his shoulder with a grunt, and jumped as hard as he could. Even as he began to rise in the air, a huge wave flowed out of the mists, crashing into the bridge with enough force to sweep everything into the water below, from their lunch to the crane used for the heaviest of work. The bridge itself shuddered and groaned under the impact. When Kakashi landed, there was nothing but the very stonework of the bridge and the water around it. From the mists he heard a laugh, a sinister chuckle that echoed and changed positions rapidly. "You're not fooling me this time, Kakashi," said Zabuza, stepping out from the concealing mists. He stood, sword still on his back, shaking his head and laughing. Kakashi didn't bother to talk. He tossed the kunai still in his right hand, and then lunged forward, following the thrown blade as fast as he could with the second blade ready. Zabuza turned slightly, catching the thrown weapon in his left hand. He then caught Kakashi's right hand with his own, pulling the gray-haired shinobi to one side, then casually threw the captured blade into Tazuna's chest. Tazuna vanished in a puff of smoke. Far from becoming furious, Zabuza laughed even harder as Kakashi stood, leaving the second kunai in Zabuza's hand. "Stop, please," the missing nin said between chuckles. "I know that you must be another clone, so spare me the bad act." Kakashi stood up straight, and after a moment, he nodded. "How?" he asked, his voice confused but polite. "I have been watching the bridge each day, observing both Kakashi and the bridge builder. The real Kakashi acts alert for a short amount of time and then ignores the mists. You, Kakashi, act too nervous. An obvious ploy to try and draw me out. I am shocked your clone would make such a mistake." Zabuza began to walk forward casually, blade still on his back. As for Tazuna, he drinks like a fish, and yet his clone has yet to take a sip from their bottle. He also cusses a lot more than the clone did when he is working. He stopped, just out of arm's reach, and beneath his cloth mask, Kakashi could see him smile. "The real Tazuna isn't here, is he? He's back home, quietly relaxing under your guard." Kakashi was silent, but even silence could be telling at times. Zabuza laughed, then shook his head. "You're right, that's too obvious for you. I've been reading up on your history in the bingo book. Kakashi, master of the double bluff. The mystery of the thousand jutsu. Shogi Master Kakashi. Sharingan Kakashi. Titles you have earned, I see. No, back at home is too obvious. Which makes it an even chance, I am guessing." Kakashi bit his tongue, and regretted it immediately when Zabuza's eyes began to sparkle. Zabuza walked past the clone, certain, then paused and turned slightly. "My own little student is scouting the forest around his home, watching for your genin to show up, possibly while escorting the target. If he finds them, which I am sure of, he'll deal with the bridge builder." He spun the kunai in an idle motion, an open mockery of the clone's own actions earlier, his mask stretching from the wide grin on his face, then he raised his arm to throw. "Still, you are known to double bluff, a great deal in fact. So I think I'll pay the house a visit anyhow." He threw the dagger. "Shit," said Naruto, landing on the next tree in line and waving at Sasuke. The black-haired boy landed with a grunt several trees down, doubled over from the weight of the bridge builder, then jumped back. When he landed, Naruto leaned in. "Zabu noticed the fakes at the bridge. He has eyes everywhere, it seems." Sasuke gave a silent nod and waited. A slight whistle, barely audible, announced the arrival of a trio of Saban. Sasuke turned away, shifting Tazuna as he did so, and took all three on the arm with a hiss. He dropped to the ground below and released the old man, then straightened when Naruto landed next to him. Naruto looked around carefully, wiping sweat from his face nervously, then whispered, "I'll go left, you go right, we'll find them all in the middle, right?" Sasuke nodded, and in the middle of the nod, lashed out with a fast kick, striking Naruto in the gut. The blonde stumbled back, clutching his stomach, and glared at Sasuke. "Your impersonation is weak," said Sasuke, tucking his hands into his pockets. Behind him, Tazuna turned and ran behind a tree. "As hard as he works, I've never seen Naruto sweat, and he's too stupid to get nervous over a handful of Saban. He knows as well as I do that we've got two opponents, and one is at the bridge. And his grasp of tactics is so bad that when we planned out this little session, every one of the plans involved him running straight at the nearest opponent." He shrugged and gave his foe a sharp smile. "Well, all but one." The fake Naruto stood and released their technique, revealing the hunter nin Naruto had reported on earlier, the one he had talked to in the forest. "Admittedly, under those circumstances, I performed poorly. I should have guessed some, if not all, of those things. But if he's not already on me, then where is he?" Sasuke grinned, his eyes glancing just over Haku's shoulder before refocusing on the missing nin. Haku turned, impossibly fast, arm raised to throw, but there was nobody behind him. He gasped as he followed through with his turn, desperately willing his body to move faster, arm still ready to throw, but in the end, even his speed was insufficient, and he turned back to Sasuke just in time for the mass of sand strike him in the face. He screamed as the coarse cloud of particles spread into his eyes, his mouth. They burned where they touched him, a searing pain without real heat. He threw his senbon where he knew Sasuke used to be and jumped to one side, ripping off his mask and rubbing desperately at his searing eyes. But if anything, the pain intensified. "I'd stop rubbing if I were you," said Sasuke from one side. Haku threw another handful of senbon blindly, then stumbled over something on the ground and fell. Sasuke's voice had already moved, and his tone was both sinister and cheery as he explained. "It's ground glass, seeped in capsaicin, mixed with salt. I keep a handful in each pocket now, and thanks for that little trick, Kakashi-sensei," he thought, dipping his hands back into his pockets. He dodged another wild senbon throw, then shook his head as Haku continued to rub his eyes. "Surrender, and I'll get our sensei to help you out. That dust can cause permanent damage if you don't take care of it right." "Never," said Haku. With one hand, he threw more projectiles, and with the other, he made a sign. Sasuke turned quickly, dodging the throw and looking around. A small dome of ice, sectioned into small panes like a mirror, was rising from the ground, surrounding him. He crouched, ready to jump out, but Haku started tossing countless senbon in his direction, fast enough to block his leap, and by the time he found the timing of the throws, the dome was closed. "I may be blind," said Haku, backing into one of the mirror-clear ice panes, "but I don't need to see to hit you from within my demonic mirror ice crystal's dome." Sasuke charged, but Haku had already entered the ice, and from all around him, Sasuke could sense incoming projectiles. He turned away, Sharingan activating as he did so, and started spinning rapidly and gracefully across the circle, taking a few hits but avoiding any truly deadly injury. He bore each strike quietly, minimizing the sound he made as well as he could, waiting for the chance he needed. Then his trusty eyes caught sight of Tazuna, charging at the mirrors on the other side of him, his hands raised in the snake seal. Sasuke smiled and started preparing his own surprise. Kakashi was waiting patiently, with several copies of Tazuna gathered behind him, when Zabuza showed up at Tazuna's home. He was largely unchanged, wearing nothing more than loose pants, arm warmers, and the sling for his giant blade. Kakashi waved cheerfully, then held out both hands, palms out. "Any chance we can have a chat first?" Zabuza laughed, but he also drew his sword. "So talk then. I'll be good for a few moments before I slay you." Kakashi stepped out, palms still raised, and approached without the clones. "You know, Gato is probably going to betray you. And barring that, he certainly won't pay you. He has quite the reputation." Zabuza paused, and theatrically raised his finger to his mouth in contemplation. "I never thought of that. Thank you, wise Kakashi, for warning me about the nature of those who hire Nuke-Nin for dirty jobs." He hefted his sword to his shoulder and shrugged. "How can I ever repay you? Maybe a very close haircut?" "Ha ha. Seriously, Zabuza. You won't win this. As smart as you may be, I've been preparing for this for a week. None of my kids wants to kill you over Gato's fake promises, and to be honest, I dislike the idea myself. You're far too effective to be wasted like this." Zabuza grinned under his mask, then set his blade, point down, on the grass. "Hatake Kakashi, listen well. You know my history, I am certain. You know what I am, what I did, what I killed. And you know what a stain my homeland is on this world. I am going to change that. I am going to kill the Mizukage and every last one of his allies. I will cleanse Kirigakure with a tide of blood. And to do that I need money. I will do whatever I must to achieve my goals. Sacrifice any pawn, slay any innocent, and crush anyone who stands in my way. And that would include you, Kakashi. Then step away from this fight, Zabuza." He stepped forward, just within reach, hands still up. "Konohagakure is not above hiring others outside the village, especially effective fighters and leaders. Join us, and we'll gladly pay for your efforts, and give you a chance to prove yourself as a leader. If you really want to destroy your foe, you need strength and money to do it, and you can get more of both with us than against us." Zabuza paused for a moment, his cheerful, bloodthirsty grin fading away under his mask. Instead, he looked worn, tired. "I do wish Haku had a better home. Someone so young should not suffer as I did, as I do." He took a step forward, dragging his blade in the dirt behind him. "Can you really provide that for us? Somewhere to rest?" Kakashi nodded. "Very well." Zabuza raised his sword and hooked it to his back. "We will yield, in exchange for your promise of money earned and rest taken. Give me a moment to contact Haku." Kakashi nodded and turned away, feeling slightly put off. "I can't believe that worked. I've never seen a Nuke-Nin with that much common sense." Kakashi knew he was unusual. In a world dominated by flashy techniques and excessive blood feuds, Kakashi had no interest in fighting beyond his immediate goals. Rarely did he meet a shinobi who was willing to set aside their own hubris, even for their own benefit. It might almost make one believe in hope for a better world. Then his one visible eye widened. Zabuza wore very little in the way of clothing, and had no visible pockets or bags on his person. And he wore no radio. So how could he contact Haku? Behind him, blade shining in the sunlight, Zabuza smiled as he silently swung the sword. The weapon bit deep into Kakashi's side, even as the gray-haired shinobi spun away in a desperate attempt to dodge. Zabuza roared with glee when he saw the blood on his blade, the blood leaking out of Kakashi's side. Finally, the real Kakashi is in my grasp. Stirring speech, Kakashi, he said casually, walking towards Kakashi as the man backed away. His voice rose into a mocking falsetto. Give me a home for my poor little minion, please, oh please. He swung his sword, a huge overhand blow, and laughed as Kakashi desperately tried to scramble away. Did you not hear me call them pawns, Kakashi? He swung his sword, making Kakashi jump again, then spun into the attack to kick the man in the chest. Kakashi fell and landed face down, spraying blood from his mouth onto the dirt. Zabuza kicked him again. Did I not say I would do anything? He kicked Kakashi one last time, flipping the man into his back. He raised his sword high. I'd do this if Haku was between us, even. He brought the blade down. It stopped halfway down. Zabuza grunted, straining, desperately trying to force the blade to continue, but the clones had finally made their move. Several had attached themselves to him, clinging to the extra long grip of his blade, pressing against his elbows, one in particular having wedged itself bodily between Zabuza and his sword. Near the house, 2 more copies remained, one shrinking back towards the house, the other standing still and glaring at the Nukenin. I'll get you yet, Tazuna! Run, you rat, I know which one of you is real now! Zabuza removed one of his hands from the handle, ready to start smashing clones, but froze when he saw Kakashi raise his own hands, his fingers blurring through several seals before ending with the snake. He blurred slightly, substituting for the distant copy of Tazuna, which appeared with an angry look in its eye and its hands still in the snake's seal. Zabuza snarled, even as the clones started to hiss loudly. You gave Naruto the thing? Sasuke nodded, and Naruto pulled back the collar of his shirt and coat to demonstrate. Kakashi could see, just barely visible, the edge of the explosive tag. He was leery of giving Naruto such a tool this early, but when they had made this plan the other night, he had made its uses quite clear. Tools duplicated with a shadow clone worked just as the original, so long as they held no chakra at the time, which suited Kakashi just fine when it came to exploding tags. He'd had a long talk on safety and usage with Naruto, and was fairly sure the boy would never use the original tag while it was attached to him. Fairly sure. The roar of the 2 explosions reached the town nearby, making windows shake. Sakura, standing next to the office door, smiled tiredly. Gato had no particular hours he kept, and she had been waiting for some time for his arrival, but if anything might get him to hurry up and get to his office to direct his men, it would be that. She steeled herself as she heard the shouts, the stomping of many feet approaching. She drew a kunai in her main hand and a bread knife, stolen from Tsunami the night before, in the other. She stood straight and flat behind the door, near the hinges, holding her breath. The door was opened with some force, swinging wide until it stopped against her sandals, and she heard Gato shouting at his bodyguards to hurry up as he strode in. Sakura exhaled, then pushed against the door in front of her, hard. In the time it took for Gato to reach his desk, she had the door shut. It clicked almost silently as she turned the lock. In the time it took for Gato to notice the bodies stashed under his desk, she had already slammed her first kunai firmly into the lock, wedging it into place. In the time it took for Gato to notice her, the second kunai was already in flight. Gato never even noticed the blade before it had pierced his skull and ended his life. Sakura rushed forward, even as he fell. The bread knife flashed in long, quick strokes as she collected the proof of the deed. She wondered at her actions, feeling nothing but a vague unease as she worked, but she accepted the feeling of disassociation gladly. She'd spent the night miserable, alone with nothing but her thoughts and the smell of death to keep her company, and the potted plan had been visited several times as the night wore on. Now, when it came time to finish what she had come to do, she was happy to simply get it done and examine her feelings later. She stuffed her trophy into the small bag she had tucked in her belt, and as the door shuddered under the blows of the dead man's bodyguards, she leaped out the window, hoping that she wasn't too late. Haku noticed the clone too late to stop it. The explosive tag, fueled by the clone's chakra, exploded violently, shattering several of the mirrors and melting the edges of several more, knocking Haku and Sasuke to the ground. Haku cared very little about his broken trap, however, because he heard the second explosion, off in the distance, and realized that his mission lay elsewhere. He raised his hand, drawing forth some of the water from the ice around them, and splashed it in his face, clearing his vision slightly. It still burns, but I can see well enough to avoid the trees at least. I'll leave you here, in this prison, until the fight is over. He raised his hand, and the surrounding ice grew thicker, the panels stretching out, until they formed a thick, icy barrier. He passed through it, and started to jump through the trees. Behind him, Sasuke smirked and started making hand seals. He raised his fingers to his lips, sighting on the fleeing figure beyond the ice, and blew. A single thin line of fire, no thicker than his smallest finger, flew from his lips. It struck the ice barrier, but instead of flowing around it, wasting its heat and power, the thin blast of superheated air burned through it and continued on unimpeded. The ice was riddled with imperfections, however, and the distortions from looking through it threw his aim off. Instead of striking the fleeing figure of Haku, it landed to one side, less than a foot away. Sasuke shifted his stance slightly, trying to aim through the hole, but he struck the ice again in doing so, spraying the inside of the dome with fire. He dropped the technique and charged at the small hole he had burned through the ice, Sharingan eyes nearly glowing, taking in every detail of that single block. He lunged, fist cocked, and struck just above the hole, where a tiny crack had formed from the heat of his attack. The ice shattered around him as he stumbled out. He fell face down into the dirt, then pulled himself up. He ran fast as he could for Tazuna's house, hoping that he wasn't too late. Naruto looked up sharply from where he was sitting. Kakashi had sent him into town to find a place to hide, and he'd eventually settled on an abandoned warehouse, filled with rotting crates and pallets. He, Inari, and Tsunami had been hunkered down in this building since late last night, alert and prepared. Kakashi-sensei was right, he thought, looking around the warehouse carefully. He could see Inari napping in a corner, his mother holding him lightly and trying to stay awake. Zabuza went for the family when he learned we had planned for him. Her frowned as he sorted out his new memories. The memory of Zabuza's cruel declaration of intent surfaced, and he could not turn away from the thought. He'd do anything. Kill an ally, a friend, an innocent family, anything. Naruto felt suddenly heavy, like the very weight of the world had landed on his shoulders, and decided to stay. He considered for a moment, doing his best to think carefully like Kakashi had taught him instead of jumping up and acting quickly, immediately, whatever it took to make things happen. Where can I do the most good, right here and now? Then some new memories popped into his head, and he had an answer. An obvious and painful answer. He stood and looked at his charges. Stay here. I'll leave some clones to defend you.